I'm Michael Harrison, 47, and I thought I had built the perfect life. After 23 years of marriage, my construction company was thriving, our mortgage was paid off, and our kids were settled into good colleges. Then one evening, over wine on our deck, my wife Sarah looked at me with those warm brown eyes and said, "You know what I love most about you, Michael? I'd love you even if you were poor." Something in her tone made me pause. The way she emphasized, even if, like it was some noble sacrifice she'd be making. That night I couldn't sleep. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to lose it all. Every penny, every asset, every comfort we'd built together. Not really, of course, but Sarah wouldn't know that. What happened next would reveal truths about my marriage that I never could have imagined. Her lawyer's call was just the beginning. Do you've ever questioned whether love is truly unconditional? You'll want to hear this story. Subscribe for more tales of truth, betrayal, and the courage to seek answers. I suppose I should explain how I got to this point. Why a successful man in his late 40s would even consider such a drastic test of his wife's love. My name is Michael Harrison, and I built Harrison Construction from nothing. Started with a beat-up pickup truck and a toolbox my father left me when he passed. That was 25 years ago, back when Sarah and I were newlyweds, living in a cramped apartment above Mrs. Chun's grocery store. We had dreams then, but no money to make them reality. Sarah was different back then. She'd pack my lunch in brown paper bags, kiss me goodbye at 5 a.m., and never complain when I came home covered in dust and exhaustion. We'd sit on our second-hand couch, eating mac and cheese. And she'd rub my shoulders while I told her about my plans to build something bigger. "We'll get there, Michael," she'd say. "I believe in you." Those were the words that kept me going through 16-hour days, through the jobs that barely paid enough to cover materials, through the sleepless nights when I wondered if I was chasing an impossible dream. Sarah seemed to understand that every sacrifice we made was an investment in our future. But somewhere along the way, things changed. As Harrison Construction grew, as we moved from the apartment to a modest house and then to our current home. In Maple Ridge, the nice part of town, Sarah's attitude shifted. The gratitude in her eyes when I brought home my first real paycheck was replaced by something else. Expectation maybe, or worse, entitlement. I remember the exact moment I first noticed it. 3 years ago, at our neighbor's anniversary party. Sarah was talking to Linda Morrison, the wife of the town's only surgeon. "Oh, Michael does well enough," Sarah had said, with this slight laugh that made my stomach turn. "We're comfortable." The way she said it, like she was apologizing for not being married to someone more impressive. What Sarah didn't know I'd never told her was that Harrison Construction wasn't just my business anymore. 5 years ago, my brother David had approached me about a partnership. He'd moved to California, made it big in tech, and wanted to invest back home. We'd structured it quietly, with him as a silent partner. His capital injection had allowed us to take on the major commercial projects that really built our wealth. The business partnership agreement sat in my safe at home, along with documentation showing that our net worth was actually closer to $3 million, not the comfortable middle-class lifestyle Sarah assumed we had. I'd been planning to surprise her with the truth for our 25th anniversary next year, a celebration of how far we'd come together. But that comment about loving me even if I were poor changed everything. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, like she was congratulating herself for her nobility, like loving her husband was some kind of charitable act. That night, lying in bed listening to Sarah's steady breathing, I made a decision that would test everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I was going to find out if she really meant what she said. The plan came together faster than I'd expected. My accountant, Jim Brennan, and I had been friends since high school. When I explained what I needed, a convincing but temporary financial crisis, he understood immediately. "You sure about this, Michael?" Jim asked, leaning back in his office chair. "This kind of thing can backfire spectacularly." I nodded, though my stomach was churning. "I need to know, Jim. I need to know if she really loves me, or if she's just comfortable." Jim sighed and pulled out a legal pad. "Okay, here's what we'll do. We'll create a paper trail showing that your biggest client defaulted on a major payment. That'll justify liquidating assets to cover immediate expenses. I'll prepare documents showing mounting debts, potential lawsuits, the whole 9 yards. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I would tell Sarah that Morrison Development, our largest client, had filed for bankruptcy, leaving us holding the bag for nearly $500,000 in unpaid invoices. The domino effect would be catastrophic. We'd have to sell equipment, lay off workers, possibly lose the house. Of course, none of it was true. Morrison Development was solid as a rock, and my actual financial position was stronger than ever. But the paperwork Jim created looked devastatingly real. I'd started the deception on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while drinking coffee, when I burst through the door carrying a manila folder filled with our fake documents. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, letting my voice shake slightly. "Something terrible has happened." She looked up, and for a moment, I saw genuine concern in her eyes. "Michael, what's wrong? You look pale." I sat down heavily at the kitchen table and spread the papers in front of her. Morrison Development filed for Chapter 11 last night. They owe us $470,000, and we're never going to see a penny of it. Sarah's hand went to her throat. Oh my God, are you sure? I've been on the phone with lawyers all morning, I said, hating how easily the lies came. This is going to destroy us, Sarah. We're going to lose everything. For the next hour, I painted a picture of financial ruin. The equipment would have to be sold. The crew would be laid off. We'd have to liquidate our savings, maybe even sell the house. I watched Sarah's face carefully as I spoke, looking for any sign of the woman who used to rub my shoulders and tell me we'd get through anything together. At first, she seemed genuinely supportive. She reached across the table and took my hand. We'll figure this out, Michael. We always do. But as the days passed and I continued the charade staging phone calls with creditors, bringing home final notices, acting increasingly stressed and defeated, I began to notice subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. She stopped asking about my day. She started spending more time on her phone, often stepping outside or into another room to take calls. When I suggested we might need to cancel our upcoming vacation to Bermuda, she snapped at me in a way that felt disproportionate to the situation. I've been looking forward to that trip for months. Michael, can't you figure something out? The most telling moment came on a Friday evening. 2 weeks into my deception, I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by the fake financial documents, when Sarah walked in wearing a new dress I'd never seen before. Where did you get that? I asked. She touched the fabric self-consciously. Oh, this old thing. I've had it forever, but I knew she was lying. The dress still had creases from being folded, and I could see the faint outline where a price tag had been removed. Sarah had gone shopping while I was supposedly facing financial ruin. That night, I lay awake thinking about the woman I'd married. The Sarah who used to mend my work clothes to save money wouldn't have bought a new dress during a crisis. The Sarah who used to clip coupons and comparison shop for groceries wouldn't have dismissed my concerns about our vacation. I was beginning to realize that my test wasn't just revealing whether Sarah loved me despite being poor, it was revealing whether she loved me at all. The phone rang at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. Sarah answered it in the kitchen, and I heard her voice drop to a whisper. When she hung up, she came to find me in my office. That was my sister, she said. She's having some health issues. I might need to go stay with her for a few days. I nodded, but something in her tone made me suspicious. Sarah's sister lived in Florida, and they barely spoke. In 23 years of marriage, Sarah had never made an emergency trip to help her. Of course, I said. Family comes first. But as I watched my wife pack her bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't going to Florida at all. Sarah's emergency trip to Florida lasted 4 days. When she returned, she seemed different, more distant, more calculating. She'd glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, and I caught her several times, quickly closing her laptop when I walked into a room. It was during her absence that I decided to dig deeper into our finances. Not the fake crisis I'd created, but our real financial situation. What I found made my blood run cold. Our joint savings account, which should have contained nearly $60,000, was down to $18,000. The money hadn't been withdrawn all at once. Sarah had been making strategic transfers over the past 6 months. $5,000 here, $3,000 there. Amounts small enough to avoid triggering any automatic alerts I might have set up. I called the bank immediately. This is Michael Harrison. I need to understand these transfers from our joint savings account. The customer service representative was helpful but limited in what she could share. I could see the money was transferred to another account at our institution, Mr. Harrison. The account holder would have needed to provide proper identification and have authorization to make the transfers. Can you tell me which account received the transfers? I'm sorry, sir. I can only confirm that the receiving account is also under the name Sarah Harrison. You'd need to speak with your wife about the specifics. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the bank statements. Sarah had been quietly moving our money for months long before my fake financial crisis began. This wasn't a reaction to our supposed troubles. This was planned. That evening, I confronted her, as gently as I could. Sarah, I was reviewing our accounts today, and I noticed some transfers from our savings. With everything that's going on, I need to understand where we stand financially. She was loading the dishwasher, her back to me. Oh, that. I moved some money to a separate account for emergencies. I thought it would be smart to have something set aside, just in case. Just in case of what? She turned around, and for a moment, I saw something flash in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. In case things get worse. Michael, in case we need money that creditors can't touch. It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't feel true. If she'd been worried about creditors, why hadn't she mentioned it? And why had the transfer started months before our supposed crisis? I decided to call our kids. Emma was a senior at Northwestern, and Jake was finishing his sophomore year at Duke. Both of them were smart, observant young adults who'd grown up watching their parents' marriage. If Sarah was planning something, they might have noticed changes in her behavior. Emma answered on the second ring. Hi, Dad, how are you holding up? I'm okay, sweetheart. It's been a tough few weeks, but we'll figure it out. Mom told me about the business troubles. I'm really sorry, Dad. I know how hard you've worked. I paused, wondering how much Sarah had told them. What exactly did she say? Just that one of your big clients went bankrupt and you might have to sell the house? She seemed pretty upset about it. Did she say anything else? About our plans or what we might do next? Emma was quiet for a moment. Well, she did ask me something kind of strange. She wanted to know if Jake and I would be okay if you and she got divorced. Not that she was planning it or anything, but just hypothetically. She said sometimes financial stress can destroy a marriage. My heart sank. What did you tell her? Told her that was a horrible thing to even think about, especially when you're going through such a hard time. I mean, shouldn't she be supporting you right now, instead of thinking about leaving? After I hung up with Emma, I called Jake. His conversation with his mother had been similar casual questions about how he'd handle his parents' divorce, framed as concern about the stress I was under, but Jake shared something Emma hadn't mentioned. Dad, I need to tell you something. When I was home for spring break last month, I overheard Mom on the phone. She was talking to someone about how she couldn't live like this much longer, and that she deserved better after all these years. At the time I thought she was talking about stress from your work schedule, but now I'm wondering if she meant something else. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife of 23 years, listening to her breathe, and realized I was sleeping next to a stranger. The woman who'd once promised to love me for better or worse was actively planning her escape at the first sign of trouble, but the most devastating realization was that this wasn't really about money at all. Sarah had been moving our assets and planting seeds with our children months before my fake crisis began. She'd been planning to leave me regardless of our financial situation. My test had revealed something far worse than a fair-weather wife. It had revealed a woman who'd been systematically preparing to abandon our marriage while still sharing my bed and accepting my love. I was beginning to understand that the phone call from her lawyer, the one that was coming soon, wasn't going to be about my fake bankruptcy at all. The decision to hire a private investigator wasn't easy. In 23 years of marriage, I'd never questioned Sarah's faithfulness or her whereabouts. But the secret bank account, the mysterious phone calls, and the lies about her emergency trip to Florida had shattered my trust completely. I found Marcus Webb through a referral from Jim Brennan. Webb was a former state police detective who'd started his own agency after retirement. He was professional, discreet, and expensive, exactly what I needed. I understand you have some concerns about your wife's activities, Webb said during our first meeting in his downtown office. Before we proceed, I need to be clear about what I can and cannot do, and what you might discover. I shifted in my chair. I just need to know the truth. Webb nodded slowly. The truth can be devastating, Mr. Harrison. I've seen marriages end over things that might have been worked through if the spouse had never hired someone like me. Are you prepared for that possibility? I'm already living with uncertainty, I said. At least with facts, I can make informed decisions. Webb's investigation began immediately. Within 3 days, he'd uncovered information that made my stomach turn. Sarah's emergency trip to Florida had actually been a long weekend in Chicago, where she'd stayed at the Palmer House Hotel. Hotel records showed she hadn't been alone. The name on the adjoining room reservation is Richard Castellano, Webb reported during our follow-up meeting. He's a successful investment banker, divorced, originally from your area. My research indicates he and your wife knew each other. In college, I stared at the hotel receipts Webb had somehow obtained. Are you saying she's having an affair? I'm saying she spent 3 days in Chicago with a man who isn't her husband, and they had adjoining hotel rooms. The interpretation is up to you, but there was more. Webb had followed Sarah to several locations over the past week: a law office downtown, a bank branch I'd never seen her use, and twice to coffee shops where she'd met with Richard Kest, who'd apparently made multiple trips to our small town. The photographs Webb showed me were devastating. Sarah and Richard sitting close together at a corner table in Caf Milano, her hand on his arm as they laughed at something he'd said. Sarah entering the law office of Patterson and Associates, a firm that specialized in divorce proceedings. Sarah and Richard in what appeared to be an intimate embrace in the parking lot of the Marriott. There's something else, Webb said, sliding another folder across his desk. I was able to obtain some information about Mr. Castellano's financial situation. He's worth approximately $12 million, with properties in Chicago, Denver, and Naples, Florida. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Sarah hadn't just been planning to leave me, she'd been planning to leave me for someone else, someone with the kind of wealth that would allow her to live the lifestyle she apparently felt she deserved. The timing is interesting, Webb continued. Based on hotel records and restaurant receipts, it appears your wife has been in contact with Mr. Castellano for at least 4 months. The frequency of their meetings has increased significantly in the past 6 weeks. 4 months. Sarah had been planning her exit strategy for 4 months, long before I'd even considered testing her love with my fake financial crisis. The irony was bitter. While I'd been trying to determine if she'd love me while poor, she'd been preparing to leave me for someone rich. That evening, I sat in my office staring at the photographs Webb had provided. There was Sarah, my wife of 23 years, looking happier and more animated than I'd seen her in months. She was laughing at something Richard had said, her eyes bright with the kind of joy I used to see when we were young and building our life together. But what hurt most wasn't the apparent effort, it was the calculation behind it. Sarah hadn't fallen into temptation. She'd methodically planned her departure from our marriage. The secret bank account, the conversations with our children about divorce, the lies about her whereabouts, it was all part of a carefully orchestrated strategy. I thought about the woman I'd married, the one who used to kiss me goodbye at 5 a.m. and tell me she believed in my dreams. Had she ever really loved me, or had I just been a convenient stepping stone to the life she really wanted? The next morning, Sarah was unusually cheerful at breakfast. She hummed while making coffee, and even asked about my day, something she hadn't done in weeks. "I have some good news," she announced, sitting down across from me. "I talked to my financial advisor yesterday, and she thinks we might be able to weather this crisis better than we thought. We might not have to sell the house after all." I looked at her carefully. Financial advisor. Since when do you have a financial advisor? A slight flush crept up her neck. "Oh, just someone Linda Morrison recommended. She specializes in helping families through difficult transitions." Another lie. I was beginning to realize that Sarah had become skilled at deception, weaving truth and fiction together so seamlessly that I'd stopped questioning her stories. But now, knowing what I knew, every word felt calculated. "That's wonderful news," I said, matching her cheerful tone. "I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "I love you, Michael. We're going to get through this together." But even as she spoke the words, I could see her phone buzzing with text messages on the counter behind her, and I was willing to bet I knew exactly who was sending them. The call from Emma came on a Thursday evening while Sarah was supposedly at her book club. I was in my office reviewing Webb's latest report when my daughter's name appeared on my phone screen. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," Emma said without preamble. "It's about Mom and the college expenses." My stomach tightened. "What about them?" "Well, you know how Mom always handles the tuition payments and tells us not to worry about the financial details?" "Yes. I was in the financial aid office today because there was a problem with my scholarship paperwork. The counselor mentioned something that didn't make sense. She said, our family's expected contribution for this year was only $12,000, but Mom told me you were paying $45,000. I sat up straighter. "Are you sure?" I asked to see the documentation. "Dad, according to Northwestern's records, my total cost after aid is only $18,000 per year, not the $50,000 Mom's been telling us." And Jake called me after I texted him. Duke shows the same pattern. His actual cost is $22,000, not the $60,000 Mom claims. The implications hit me like a physical blow. For 2 years, Sarah had been inflating our children's college expenses by more than $60,000 annually. Money I'd been transferring to what I thought was an education account was actually funding Sarah's secret escape plan. "Emma, I need you to do something for me. Can you get official documentation from the financial aid office showing the actual costs and payment history?" "Already done. I'm sending you everything right now." When the documents arrived in my email, I felt sick. Not only had Sarah been lying about the costs, but she'd been making the minimum required payments while pocketing the difference. Our children had been living on ramen noodles and taking out additional student loans they didn't need while their mother stockpiled money for her new life. I called Jake immediately. "Dad, I was wondering when you'd figure this out," he said quietly. I didn't want to say anything because I thought maybe you and Mom had some arrangement I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "Last semester, my account showed a past due balance even though Mom said she'd paid everything. I had to take out an emergency loan to avoid being dropped from classes. When I called Mom about it, she said there must have been a banking error and she'd fix it. But she made me promise not to tell you because she didn't want to worry you during busy season." My hands were shaking as I wrote down the details Jake provided. Sarah hadn't just been stealing from our marriage, she'd been stealing from our children's education while manipulating them into keeping her secrets. But Jake had more to tell me. "Dad, there's something else. Last month when I was having problems with my laptop, I used Mom's computer to submit an assignment. Her email was open, and I saw messages from someone named Richard. I didn't read them, but I could see they were marked as love emails in her inbox. There were dozens of them going back months. After I hung up with Jake, I sat in my office feeling the weight of Sarah's betrayal settling over me like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just about her questioning my financial stability or having doubts about our marriage. This was systematic fraud, emotional manipulation of our children, and a complete abandonment of everything we'd built together. When Sarah came home from her book club that night, she found me waiting in the living room with printed copies of the college financial documents spread across the coffee table. "Michael, what's all this? Sit down. Sarah, we need to talk." She perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes darting between me and the papers. "Is this about the college expenses? Because I can explain, please do. Explain to me why our children's actual college costs are less than half what you've been telling me. Explain why Emma and Jake have been struggling financially while you've been pocketing the difference." Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, then defensive anger. You don't understand the full picture, Michael. There are additional costs you don't see. Books, living expenses, emergency funds. Emma's total cost is $18,000 per year. You told me $50,000. Jake's total cost is $22,000. You told me $60,000. Where is the other $60,000 annually? Sarah? She stood up abruptly. I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own home. I've been managing our children's education responsibly while you've been falling apart over your business problems. My business problems that started 6 weeks ago while you've been lying about college costs for 2 years. The question hung in the air between us. Sarah's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time in months, she had no ready explanation, no smooth deflection. I want to see the account where that money went, I said quietly. I want to see every statement, every transaction, every penny of the $120,000 you've taken under false pretenses. Sarah's composure finally cracked. You have no right to demand anything from me, Michael. I'm your wife, not your employee. You're absolutely right, I said, standing up. You're my wife. The woman who promised to honor and cherish me, for better or worse. The woman who's been lying to me, stealing from our children's education, and I stopped myself before mentioning Richard Castellano. That card was better played later. And what? Sarah demanded. And making me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I married. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. Maybe you should question it, Michael. Maybe you should ask yourself if the woman you married was ever real, or if she was just what you needed her to be. With that, she walked upstairs, leaving me alone with the documents that proved my wife had been systematically stealing from our family for years. The most devastating part wasn't the money. It was the realization that Sarah had been living a double life so expertly that I'd never suspected. The woman who kissed me goodbye each morning and asked about my day had been calculating, planning, and stealing from us all along. Webb's latest report arrived the next morning, and it contained information that would haunt me for months to come. He'd managed to obtain copies of email correspondence between Sarah and Richard Castellano, dating back 7 months. I read them in my office with the door locked, each message feeling like a knife twist in my chest. The earliest emails were tentative, nostalgic old college friends, reconnecting after Richard's divorce. But they quickly became intimate, then explicit, then coldly calculating. In one email from 4 months ago, Sarah wrote, I can't keep pretending to be satisfied with this mediocre life. Richard, Michael tries hard, but he's never going to be more than a small-town contractor. I deserve better than scraping by on construction money. Scraping by? We had over $3 million in assets, and she described our life as scraping by. Richard's response was equally revealing. You married down, sweetheart? It happens to the best of us. But you're still young and beautiful enough to fix your mistake. Life's too short to settle for less than you're worth. But the email that destroyed me completely was one Sarah had sent just 2 weeks ago, right? In the middle of my fake financial crisis. The bankruptcy couldn't have come at a better time. Michael is so defeated and stressed that he's not paying attention to anything else. I've been able to move most of our liquid assets without him noticing. By the time his lawyer serves the papers, I'll have enough to start over properly. The timing is perfect. I can claim hardship and walk away with everything while he's drowning in debt. He'll be so grateful that I'm not asking for alimony that he won't fight the asset division. I had to stop reading and walk to the bathroom. I was physically sick, not just from the betrayal, but from the cold-blooded calculation of it all. Sarah hadn't just been planning to leave me, she'd been planning to destroy me, financially, while doing it. There were dozens of other emails, detailing their plans for a life together. Sarah's complaints about our embarrassing social circle, her shame about our neighborhood, her excitement about Richard's properties in Chicago and Florida. In one particularly painful message, she wrote about our children. Emma and Jake will understand eventually. They're smart kids, and they'll see that I had to choose between staying trapped in mediocrity or building a real future. Richard can't provide them with opportunities Michael never could. Better schools, better connections, a better life. But the worst part was reading about me through Sarah's eyes. To her, I wasn't a successful businessman who'd built something from nothing. It was an embarrassment, a mistake she'd made in her youth that she now needed to correct. Every memory I cherished of our early years together was reframed in her emails, as evidence of how she'd settled for less than she deserved. She wrote about our first apartment as that horrible place above the Chinese restaurant, and described our years of building the business together as watching Michael play with his little construction company while real opportunities passed us by. Even our children's accomplishments were credited to her influence, rather than our partnership. Thank God Emma inherited my ambition rather than Michael's contentment with being ordinary. I printed every email and organized them chronologically. The evolution of Sarah's thinking was clear. She'd started with nostalgia for Richard and dissatisfaction with our life, progressed to active planning for departure, and finally arrived at a cold strategy for maximum financial gain. The most recent emails contained detailed discussions about their future together. Richard had already put a deposit down on a penthouse in downtown Chicago. Sarah had researched divorce attorneys and planned her exit strategy around my supposed business failure. They'd even discussed their wedding, a small ceremony in Naples, Florida, 6 months after our divorce was finalized. That evening, Sarah came home late from what she claimed was dinner with girlfriends. She found me in the living room, reading a book and drinking a glass of wine. "You seem calm," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I'm glad you're handling the business stress better." I looked up from my book, a biography of Warren Buffett, that seemed ironically appropriate. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last night. Oh, about questioning whether the woman I married was ever real, or just what I needed her to be." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I was upset when I said that. Sometimes stress makes us say things we don't mean. Actually, I think you were more honest than you've been in years." I closed the book and set it on the side table. "Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to really think about your answer." She nodded, though I could see tension building in her shoulders. "If money weren't an issue, if we were wealthy enough that you could have anything you wanted, would you still be happy in this marriage?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her careful facade slipped, and I saw something raw and honest in her expression. "I don't know what you mean. I mean, is the problem really about money, or is the problem about us?" Sarah stared at me for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. "Michael, we've been together since we were kids. We've grown into different people with different dreams. That doesn't make either of us bad people." "Different? Dreams like what? Like traveling the world instead of never leaving this town? Like having friends who talk about more than local politics and high school football? Like being part of something bigger than a small construction company?" Her honesty was brutal, but I pushed further. "And if those things were possible, if we could travel, if we could move somewhere else, if the business could be something bigger?" She shook her head sadly. "Michael, you're a good man. You work hard. You love our children. You've provided for us better than most, but you're not." She stopped herself. "I'm not what? You're not the man I thought I was going to marry when I was 22. And there it was. The truth I'd been avoiding for months, maybe years. Sarah hadn't fallen out of love with me. She'd never really been in love with who I actually was. She'd been in love with her idea of who I might become. "Who did you think you were going to marry?" "Someone ambitious. Someone who wanted more than just a comfortable life in a small town. Someone who dreamed bigger than the next construction contract." I nodded slowly. "Someone like Richard Castellano." The color drained from Sarah's face. "What did you say?" "Richard Castellano, investment banker from Chicago. $12 million in assets. Properties in 3 states. Your college boyfriend who's been emailing you for 7 months about starting a new life together." Sarah stood up so quickly that her chair nearly toppled over. "Michael, I can explain, can you? Can you explain why you've been planning our divorce while sleeping in my bed? Can you explain why you've been stealing our children's education money to fund your escape? Can you explain why you've been lying to me for months while telling another man that you deserve better than the life we built together?" She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. For the first time in 23 years of marriage, Sarah had nothing to say. "The funny thing is," I continued, "if you'd just been honest with me, you'd told me you were unhappy and wanted something different, we could have worked together to change our life. We actually have the money to do all those things you've been dreaming about with Richard." "What do you mean?" "I mean our net worth is just over $3 million. Sarah, we could have traveled the world. We could have moved to Chicago or anywhere else you wanted. We could have had all those experiences you've been craving." She stared at me, confusion replacing the fear in her eyes. "But instead of talking to your husband, you chose to lie, steal, and cheat your way to a different life." The silence stretched between us until Sarah finally whispered, $3 million. The business partnership with David, the commercial contracts, the investments. We've been wealthy for years. Sarah, I was planning to surprise you on our 25th anniversary. For a moment, I saw genuine regret flash across her face. But then her expression hardened, and I realized that even now, even caught in her lies and confronted with evidence of her betrayal, Sarah was calculating her next move. "Well," she said finally, "I guess Richard won't be the only one with good lawyers." The call came 3 days later, on a Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m. I was expecting it, but the precision of the timing still caught me off guard. Sarah had clearly been planning this conversation down to the minute. "Mr. Harrison, this is Jennifer Patterson from Patterson & Associates. I represent your wife, Sarah Harrison, in what we hope will be an amicable dissolution of your marriage." I put the phone on speaker and reached for the notepad I'd prepared. "I see. And what exactly does amicable mean in this context?" "Well, Mr. Harrison, we understand you're facing significant financial difficulties due to recent business reversals. My client is prepared to be very reasonable about the division of assets, given the circumstances." The irony was almost laughable. Sarah's lawyer was offering to be generous about dividing assets that didn't exist, while the assets that did exist were being hidden by her client. "I appreciate your concern about my financial situation," I said carefully. "What exactly is your client proposing?" "Given the apparent insolvency of Harrison Construction and the family's current financial distress, Mrs. Harrison is willing to waive any claim to spousal support. She's also prepared to assume responsibility for half of the outstanding debts, despite having no legal obligation to do so. I had to admire the strategy. By appearing magnanimous about debts that were fictional, Sarah could justify keeping the assets she'd already hidden while looking like the generous party in divorce proceedings. That's very considerate of her, I said. And what would she expect? In return for this generosity, simply a fair division of whatever liquid assets remain. We understand there isn't much, but Mrs. Harrison would like to retain the joint savings account, her personal vehicle, and her jewelry. She's prepared to let you keep the house, despite the fact that it will likely be foreclosed upon. The house that was worth $400,000 and had no mortgage. The savings account that she'd already mostly emptied. The jewelry that included pieces worth more than $20,000. Sarah was proposing to keep everything of value while leaving me with assets she assumed were worthless. And what about our children's welfare during this transition? Mrs. Harrison has been the primary caretaker for Emma and Jake's educational needs. She proposes to continue managing their college expenses from her separate resources. The separate resources she'd stolen from those very educational expenses. I'll need some time to review this proposal with my attorney, I said. Of course, but Mr. Harrison, I hope you'll consider accepting these terms quickly. Prolonged divorce? Proceedings can be expensive, and given your current financial constraints, a swift resolution would benefit everyone involved. After Jennifer Patterson hung up, I sat in my office marveling at the audacity of Sarah's plan. She intended to walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden assets while appearing to be the victim of circumstances. Her lawyer would argue that she was being generous by not seeking alimony from a bankrupt husband, while conveniently forgetting to mention the money she'd systematically stolen over the past 2 years. The timing was perfect from her perspective. By filing during my supposed financial crisis, she could claim hardship while positioning herself as the reasonable party willing to share in my fictitious debts. Any judge would see her as either incredibly loyal or incredibly generous. But Sarah had made one crucial mistake. She'd built her entire strategy around my fake bankruptcy, never suspecting that I knew about her affair, her theft, or her real plans while she was playing chess. She didn't realize I'd been watching her moves for weeks. I called my own attorney, David Chun, no relation to Mrs. Chen from our old apartment, but equally sharp in his own way. David specialized in complex divorce cases, particularly those involving hidden assets and business valuations. David, I need to see you today. It's urgent. How urgent? My wife's attorney just called to offer me a divorce settlement that would leave me with nothing while she walks away with assets she's been hiding for months. I'll clear my schedule. Bring everything: financial records, business documents, anything that shows the true picture of your assets. There's more, David, much more. We're not just talking about hidden money. We're talking about systematic theft, adultery, and fraud. The pause on David's end was telling. Michael, how much are we talking about here? $3 million in assets she doesn't think I know about, plus evidence of an affair with detailed plans for our divorce. And David, she thinks I'm bankrupt. Jesus, how long has this been going on? At least 7 months for the affair, 2 years for the financial theft. But the divorce planning has been active for the past several weeks. Bring everything to my office at 2 o'clock. And Michael, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't let your wife know you've hired counsel. If she's been planning this as carefully as you say, we need to be equally strategic in our response. That afternoon, I spread the evidence across David's conference table. Bank statements showing Sarah's secret transfers, the college financial aid documents proving her theft, Webb's photographs of her meetings with Richard, and printed copies of every email between Sarah and her lover. David reviewed everything with the methodical precision of a surgeon. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and whistled softly. Michael, this isn't just divorce fraud. Depending on how the money was moved and what representations she makes in court, this could be criminal. The college expense fraud alone represents over $100,000 in theft. What does that mean for the divorce? It means we have leverage, significant leverage. Your wife has been planning to commit perjury by filing financial statements that omit assets she's hidden. She's planning to claim poverty while sitting on hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars. And she's doing it all while conducting an extramarital affair that's been documented in explicit detail. David pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to let her file the divorce petition based on her false financial information. We want that perjury on the record. Second, we're going to document every asset she's hidden and every lie she's told. Third, we're going to wait until she's committed to her story in court, and then we're going to destroy it systematically. About the business bankruptcy she thinks happened. David smiled grimly. That's the beautiful part. Her entire strategy depends on you being broke. When we reveal the true state of your finances, along with evidence that she's been stealing from the marriage for years, the judge is going to be very interested in how she managed to accumulate separate assets while her supposedly bankrupt husband was struggling. And Richard Castellano. No, adultery doesn't usually affect property division in our state, but it can influence custody decisions and spousal support. More importantly, It establishes a pattern of deception that undermines her credibility on everything else. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not hope, for reconciliation. That ship had sailed the moment I read Sarah's emails, but hope for justice. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting to Sarah's moves. I was making moves of my own. When I arrived home, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming softly to herself. She looked genuinely happy, probably because her lawyer had reported that I seemed receptive to their generous offer. "How was your day?" she asked, smiling at me warmly. "Interesting," I said. "Your lawyer called. Jennifer mentioned she might reach out today. I hope you'll consider what she proposed. I really think it's the best solution for everyone." I nodded thoughtfully. "It certainly seems generous, given our current circumstances." Sarah's smile brightened. "I'm glad you see it that way. I know this is hard for both of us, but I want us to handle it with dignity." Dignity. The word almost made me laugh, but I simply smiled back and said, "I couldn't agree more, Sarah. Dignity is exactly what this situation needs." The next morning, I began the most important performance of my life. Sarah expected a defeated husband, grateful for her generous offer and eager to sign away his rights. Instead, she was going to get a masterclass in strategic patience. David Chen had been clear about our approach. Let Sarah commit to her version of events completely before revealing our hand. Every lie she told under oath, every false financial statement she filed, every claim of hardship she made while sitting on stolen assets would become evidence against her. The key, David had explained, is to let her believe she's winning right, up until the moment we destroy her credibility completely. So I played the part she expected. When Sarah's divorce petition arrived by certified mail, I read it with apparent resignation, sighing heavily as I reviewed her claims of financial distress and her generous offer to share in debts that didn't exist. The petition itself was a work of fiction. Sarah claimed our total marital assets were approximately $80,000. The remaining balance in our joint checking account, and the estimated value of our furniture and vehicles. She made no mention of the $300,000. She'd moved to hidden accounts, nothing about my business partnership with David, and certainly nothing about our actual net worth of over $3 million. Her statement to the court painted her as a long-suffering wife, whose husband's business failures had destroyed their family's security. She described herself as unemployed and financially dependent, despite having hidden enough money to live comfortably for years. The petition requested a quick dissolution based on irreconcilable differences, with asset division as agreed upon by both parties. What struck me most was how completely she'd committed to the lie. This wasn't a woman keeping her options open. This was someone who'd burned every bridge to her old life in pursuit of a new one. I called David immediately after reading the petition. "She's filed," I said. "And it's even more fraudulent than we expected." "Good. The more she commits to false statements, the stronger our position becomes. Now we file our response, and we do it very carefully." David's counter-petition was a masterpiece of legal strategy. We acknowledged the marriage was irretrievably broken, but we disputed every factual claim Sarah had made. We requested a complete, forensic accounting of all marital assets, including those that might have been inadvertently omitted from Sarah's filing. We asked for full discovery of her financial records, email accounts, and recent activities. Most importantly, we included a detailed business valuation showing the true worth of Harrison Construction, complete with documentation of my partnership with David and our actual financial position. "When she sees this," David explained, "she's going to panic. She's already committed to her version of events in a legal filing. She can't simply change her story without explaining why she omitted $3 million in assets from her original petition." The response was filed on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Jennifer Patterson was calling David's office in a fury. "What exactly is your client trying to accomplish?" she demanded during a conference call that David put on speaker. "This counter-petition is clearly a desperate attempt to inflate assets that don't exist." "I'm sorry you feel that way," David replied smoothly, "but my client has provided extensive documentation supporting every claim in our filing. Perhaps you could help us understand why your client omitted so many assets from her petition." "What assets?" "Mr. Harrison's business is bankrupt, his equipment is being liquidated, and the family is facing foreclosure. Your claims of hidden wealth are delusional." David smiled at me across his desk. "Ms. Patterson, are you suggesting that the business valuation we provided is fraudulent? Because that's a very serious accusation to make about documents prepared by certified accountants and supported by bank records." There was a long pause. "I'll need to review this information with my client, of course. But I should mention that we're also requesting discovery of your client's financial activities over the past 2 years. Bank records, credit card statements, travel expenses, communication records, everything that might help us understand how a supposedly impoverished woman has been managing her affairs." Another pause, longer this time. "That seems unnecessarily invasive." "Not at all. Since your client claims to have no assets beyond her personal belongings, it should be simple to document her financial situation. Unless, of course, there are assets she's forgotten to mention." After Patterson hung up, David turned to me with satisfaction. That went exactly as I hoped. She's going to go back to Sarah and explain that we have documentation they weren't expecting. Sarah's going to have to decide whether to admit she lied in her original filing, or try to maintain the deception in the face of overwhelming evidence. What do you think she'll do? She'll panic first? Then she'll try to blame the omissions on stress or oversight? Finally, she'll realize that her entire strategy has collapsed, and she'll start looking for a way to minimize the damage. David was right about the panic. That evening, Sarah came home in a state I'd never seen before. Her usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by barely controlled anxiety. Michael, we need to talk about the divorce proceedings. I looked up from the newspaper. I was reading a prop I'd chosen specifically to appear casual and unaware. What? About them? Your lawyer filed some kind of response that's causing problems. What kind of problems? Sarah sat down across from me, her hands fidgeting with her wedding ring. He's claiming we have assets that don't exist anymore. Business valuations that don't reflect your current bankruptcy situation. It's going to complicate everything unnecessarily. I folded the newspaper and gave her my full attention. Sarah, I told my lawyer the truth about our financial situation. If he filed claims about business assets, it's because those assets exist. But Michael, your business is failing. The Morrison Development bankruptcy, the equipment sales, the mounting. That's Saxo, I interrupted. There's something I need to tell you about that. Her face went pale. What do you mean? Morrison Development never filed for bankruptcy. The business is fine, Sarah. It's actually doing better than ever. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Sarah's face as the implications sank. And if the business wasn't bankrupt, if there had been no financial crisis, then her entire divorce strategy was built on quicksand. I don't understand, she whispered. I was testing you. Sarah, I wanted to see how you'd react if we lost everything. I wanted to know if you really would love me, even if I were poor. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing without sound. But what I discovered was so much worse than anything I'd imagined. I didn't just learn that you wouldn't love me if I were pariah, learned that you'd been planning to leave me regardless of our financial situation. Sarah's composure finally cracked completely. Michael, you don't understand. I can explain everything. Can you? Can you explain the emails with Richard Castellano? Can you explain the hidden bank accounts? Can you explain why you've been stealing from our children's education while planning a new life with another man? She buried her face in her hands. Oh God, you know about Richard. I know about everything. Sarah, every lie, every theft, every betrayal. Your lawyer called my supposed bankruptcy a blessing because it would make the divorce easier. But the only bankruptcy here is the moral one you've been hiding for months. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of a woman whose carefully laid plans had just collapsed around her. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you have to decide whether to admit you committed perjury in your divorce filing, or whether to continue lying and face the consequences when we prove it in court. And if I admit I made mistakes in the filing, then you have to explain to a judge why you forgot to mention $3 million in marital assets while claiming poverty. You have to explain why you moved money to hidden accounts while your husband was supposedly bankrupt. And you have to explain why you were planning to defraud the court while conducting an extramarital affair. Sarah sat in silence for several minutes, processing the wreckage of her strategy. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did, Sarah. You planned every detail. The only thing you didn't plan for was the possibility that your supposedly naive husband might be smarter than you thought. The morning after our confrontation, I woke up to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. For a moment, I wondered if she'd fled to Chicago to be with Richard rather than face the consequences of her actions. But then I heard movement in the kitchen and realized she was simply avoiding me. When I came downstairs, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and papers scattered around her. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. What are you doing? I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Trying to figure out how to fix this mess, she said without looking up. There's no fixing it, Sarah. You committed fraud. You stole from our family. You lied under oath in a legal filing. These aren't mistakes, they're crimes. She finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in 23 years of marriage. Genuine fear. Not the manageable anxiety of someone caught in a lie, but the deep terror of someone who'd finally realized the full scope of their actions. Michael, please. I know I made terrible choices, but we can work this out. We don't have to destroy each other. I sat down across from her, noting the irony of her words. Sarah, you've been working to destroy me for months. You've stolen my money, betrayed my trust, and lied to our children. The only reason you want to work this out now is because you got caught. That's not true, isn't it? Yesterday morning, you were perfectly happy to proceed with a divorce that would leave me with nothing while you walked away with stolen assets. The only thing that changed was your discovery that I knew about your lies. Sarah closed her laptop and leaned forward. I was confused. Michael, scared about our future, feeling trapped in a life that wasn't what I'd dreamed about. When Richard contacted me, it felt like a second chance at happiness. For 7 months. What? You've been planning this for 7 months, Sarah? That's not confusion, that's calculation. You researched divorce lawyers, moved money to hidden accounts, and lied to our children about college expenses. That's not a moment of weakness, that's a systematic betrayal of everything we built together. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice carried a bitterness I'd never heard before. You want to know the truth, Michael? Fine. The truth is that I settled for you. I was 22 years old, and I thought you were going to become something more than a small-town contractor. I thought the ambition and drive I saw in you would lead somewhere bigger. The words hit like physical blows, but I forced myself to remain calm, and when it didn't, I tried to make peace with the life we had. I really did. For years, I told myself that love was enough, that a comfortable life with a good man was more than most people had. But it wasn't enough. No, it wasn't enough. Her honesty was brutal, but at least it was honest. When Richard found me on social media last year, it reminded me of who I used to be, who I could have been if I'd made different choices. So, you decided to make different choices now. I decided to stop pretending I was happy with mediocrity. She looked at me directly for the first time. Michael, you're a good man. You work hard. You love our children. You've never cheated or lied or hurt me deliberately. But you're not the man I thought I was marrying, and Richard is. Richard is successful. Really successful. He travels the world. He owns properties in 3 states. He moves in circles where people talk about ideas instead of football scores and local gossip. I nodded slowly. And you think that makes him better than me? I think it makes him better for me. The admission hung in the air. Between us, for the first time in months, Sarah was being completely honest about her motivations. It wasn't about love or compatibility or even money. It was about status. About the life she felt she deserved. Sarah, we have $3 million. We could have traveled the world. We could have moved to Chicago or New York or anywhere you wanted. We could have had all those experiences you're talking about. But we would still have been us, Michael. I would still have been married to a contractor from a small town, just a contractor with more money. The brutal honesty of her statement took my breath away. It wasn't about what we could do or where we could go, it was about who I was at my core. In Sarah's mind, I was fundamentally inadequate, not because of my actions or our lifestyle, but because of my origins and my character. I see, I said quietly. So when you told me you'd love me, even if I were poor, what I really meant was that I'd been trying to convince myself I could love you despite being disappointed in who you turned out to be. We sat in silence for several minutes. The kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped our children with homework, where we'd planned our future together, now felt like a courtroom where our marriage was being dissected and pronounced dead. What about Emma and Jake? I asked finally. What about them? How do you explain to them that you've been stealing from their education to fund your escape from their father? Sarah's composure cracked again. I wasn't stealing from them. I was securing their future. Richard can provide opportunities for them that you never could, by taking out loans they didn't need while you pocketed their tuition money. I was planning to pay it back once the divorce was settled. With money you stole from our marriage. With money I was entitled to as your wife? I stared at her, amazed by her ability to rationalize her actions. Sarah, you weren't entitled to money. You obtained through fraud. You weren't entitled to hide assets during divorce proceedings. And you certainly weren't entitled to steal from our children while lying to their faces about it. I did what I had to do to build a better future for all of us. No, you did what you wanted to do to build a better future for yourself. Emma and Jake were just collateral damage, and I was just an obstacle to be removed. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. I don't have to justify my choices to someone who is content to stay ordinary forever. You're right, I said, standing as well. You don't have to justify anything to me, but you will have to justify it to a judge. You'll have to explain your lies under oath. You'll have to face cross-examination about every email you sent to Richard, every dollar you moved to hidden accounts, every lie you told our children. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening you, Sarah. I'm simply explaining the reality of your situation. You committed perjury in your divorce filing. You engaged in systematic theft of marital assets. You defrauded our children's education accounts. These aren't relationship problems, they're crimes. Her face went white. You wouldn't? I wouldn't? What hold you accountable for your actions? Report financial crimes to the authorities? Protect myself from further fraud? You wouldn't destroy the mother of your children over money? I looked at this woman I'd shared my life with for 23 years. This stranger who'd been planning my destruction while sleeping in my bed, and felt something die inside me. Sarah, you destroyed yourself. I'm just refusing to help you cover it up with that. She grabbed her purse and keys and headed for the door. I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days while I figure out my next steps. The sister in Florida you've never visited. I called after her. Or are you going to Chicago to plan your defense with Richard? Lyd? She paused at the door but didn't turn around. I'll be in touch through my lawyer. You might want to find a new lawyer, I said. Jennifer Patterson is going to drop you the moment she realizes how many lies you told her. After Sarah left, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage that had been dying for years without my knowledge. The most devastating part wasn't her betrayal, it was her complete lack of remorse. Even now, even caught in her lies and faced with the consequences of her actions, Sarah believed she was the victim of circumstances, rather than the architect of her own destruction. I called David Chen to update him on Sarah's departure and her admissions. "Michael, I need you to understand something," David said after I'd recounted our conversation. "What your wife just told you amounts to a confession of fraud. If she tries to claim in court that her omissions were accidental, we now have evidence that they were deliberate. What happens next? Next we wait. She's going to try to find a way out of this mess, probably by claiming she was confused or overwhelmed. But she's already committed to too many lies to walk them back credibly, and if she doesn't try to walk them back, then we go to court and let a judge decide how to handle someone who committed perjury, theft, and fraud while planning to defraud." The divorce proceedings? As I hung up the phone, I realized that my simple test of Sarah's love had uncovered something far more complex and devastating than I'd ever imagined. I'd wanted to know if she'd love me when I was poor. Instead, I'd learned that she'd never really loved me at all. Emma called that evening, her voice tight with emotion. "Dad, Mom called me about an hour ago. She said you two are getting divorced, and that you're trying to make her look bad in court." I closed my eyes, knowing this conversation was inevitable, but dreading it nonetheless. "What exactly did she tell you?" "She said you hired some expensive lawyer to fight the divorce, even though she was being generous about money. She said you're claiming she stole from us, which doesn't make sense because she's the one who's always handled our college expenses." "Emma, can you and Jake come home this weekend? There are some things we need to discuss as a family. Is it true?" "Dad, did Mom really steal money from our college accounts?" I could hear the pain in my daughter's voice, and it broke my heart. "Sweetheart, there are some very complicated things happening right now. Things your mother and I should have protected you from. But since she's already involved you, I think you deserve to know the truth." "What truth?" "The truth about our finances, about your college expenses, and about some choices your mother made that affect all of us." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Dad, I'm scared. Jake and I have been talking, and nothing Mom's told us lately makes sense. She says you're broke, but she's been talking about moving to Chicago and enrolling us in different schools. She says she's worried about money, but she bought a new car last month." "A new car I knew nothing about. Another expense funded by stolen money? Just come home this weekend, both of you. We'll sit down together and I'll answer every question you have." Jake and Emma arrived Friday evening, and I could see the stress on both their faces. These were kids who'd grown up in a stable, loving home, and now their world was falling apart in ways they couldn't understand. We gathered in the living room after dinner, the same room where Sarah and I had confronted each other just days earlier. I'd prepared for this conversation carefully, knowing that what I said tonight would shape my relationship with my children for the rest of our lives. "Before we start," I said, "I want you both to know that I love you more than anything in this world. Nothing that's happening between your mother and me changes that." Emma nodded, but Jake looked skeptical. "Dad, Mom says you're being vindictive because she wants to leave. She says you're trying to punish her for not wanting to be married anymore. Your mother has the right to end our marriage if she's unhappy," I said carefully, "but she doesn't have the right to lie, steal, or commit fraud in the process." "What do you mean, steal?" Emma asked. I pulled out the college financial aid documents I'd prepared. "Emma, according to Northwestern's records, your total annual cost after financial aid is $18,000. How much did your mother tell me it was?" Emma looked at the papers, her face growing pale. "She told you $50,000. And Jake, Duke shows your annual cost as $22,000. What did she tell me?" $60,000, Jake said quietly. "So between the two of you, your mother has been overcharging me by about $60,000 per year for 2 years. That's $120,000 that she moved to accounts I didn't know about." The silence in the room was deafening. I watched my children process the implications of what I'd just told them. "But Dad," Emma said slowly, "if she was taking extra money, where was it going? I mean, Jake and I have been living on basically nothing. I've been eating ramen for dinner most nights because I thought we couldn't afford groceries. The money went into secret accounts that your mother has been using to plan a new life for herself." "What kind of new life?" Jake asked. This was the hardest part. "Your mother has been having a relationship with another man, someone she knew in college who contacted her last year. They've been planning to get married after our divorce is final." Emma's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God. The money she took from your education funds was supposed to help her start over with him in Chicago." Jake stood up abruptly. "Are you telling me that Mom has been stealing our tuition money to fund an affair?" "I'm telling you that your mother made choices that hurt all of us. She's been planning to leave our family for months, and she's been using money meant for your education to make that possible." Emma was crying now. "Dad, why didn't you stop her? Why didn't you know what was happening?" "I should have known," I admitted. "I should have been paying closer attention to our finances, to your mother's behavior, to the signs that something was wrong. I failed to protect you from this. But you know now," Jake said. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to make sure your education is secure." I'm going to make sure your mother faces consequences for her choices. And I'm going to make sure you both understand that none of this is your fault. What about Mom? Emma asked. What happens to her? That depends on the choices she makes next. She can admit what she's done and try to make things right, or she can continue lying and face the legal consequences. Jake sat back down, his face hard with anger I'd rarely seen from him. Dad, I need to tell you something. Last month when Mom visited me at Duke, she asked me some weird questions about how I'd feel if you and she got divorced. But she also asked how I'd feel about having a stepfather who could provide better opportunities for me. She was already talking about Richard. Is that his name? She said she'd met someone who could help pay for law school, someone who could introduce me to people in Chicago who could help my career. Emma looked at her brother in shock. She offered you bribes to accept her affair. I think that's exactly what she did, Jake said. She made it sound like Dad was holding us back, like this new guy could give us things Dad couldn't. I felt sick. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me, she had been actively trying to turn our children against me while bribing them with promises of a better life funded by stolen money. Dad, Emma said quietly, there's something else. When Mom called me today, she said that if we sided with you in the divorce, she might not be able to help with our college expenses anymore. She said things were going to be financially tight for her. She threatened to cut off your education if you didn't support her affair. Not in those words, but yeah, that's what it felt like. Jake shook his head in disgust. So let me get this straight. Mom steals our tuition money, uses it to fund an affair, and then threatens to cut us off financially if we don't support her leaving Dad for her boyfriend. That appears to be the situation, I said. Emma wiped her eyes and looked at me directly. Dad, what's our real financial situation? Not the story Mom's been telling, but the truth. I took a deep breath. The truth is that we're actually quite wealthy. The business has been very successful, and I have investments your mother doesn't know about. Your education was never in jeopardy, even if we'd lost every penny we have. So when Mom said she was worried about money, she was lying. She's been lying about almost everything for months. Jake stood up again, pacing now. I can't believe this. I spent last semester eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because I thought we couldn't afford meal plans. I took out student loans I didn't need because Mom said you were struggling financially. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry that you've been suffering while your mother was stealing from you. Emma looked at me with a maturity that broke my heart. Dad, what do you need from us? I need you to know that I love you both, that your education and your future are secure, and that none of this changes anything between us. What about Mom? She asked. What about her? Do you still love her? I considered the question carefully. I love the woman I thought I married. I love the memories we created together, and I love that she gave me you too. But the woman who's been lying and stealing and planning to destroy our family? No, I don't love her. I don't even know who she is. Jake stopped pacing and looked at me. Dad, if Mom tries to make us choose sides, you should know that we're choosing you. You don't have to choose sides. She's still your mother. She's the mother who's been stealing from us and lying to us. Emma said firmly. She's the mother who tried to bribe us to accept her affair. She's the mother who threatened our education. If we didn't support her betrayal of our father, she made her choice. Dad, Jake added, now we're making ours. That night, after my children had gone to bed, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation we'd just had. Sarah had lost more than just her marriage. She'd lost the respect and trust of the children she claimed to be protecting. Her attempts to manipulate them had backfired spectacularly, revealing the calculated nature of her betrayal even to her own family. But what struck me most was the maturity Emma and Jake had shown. They'd been hurt and confused by their mother's actions, but they'd also seen through her attempts at manipulation. They understood that love doesn't involve theft, lies, or threats. Sarah had gambled everything on the belief that she could control the narrative, that she could make herself the victim and me the villain. Instead, her own children had seen her actions for what they were, the selfish choices of a woman who'd put her own desires above her family's welfare. The next morning, Emma came into my office while I was reviewing legal documents. Dad, I want to help. Help with what? With the divorce case. If Mom's been lying in legal documents, if she's committed fraud, I want to testify about what she told us. I want to make sure the truth comes out. I looked at my daughter, this strong young woman who'd been forced to grow up too quickly, and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Are you sure? Testifying against your mother won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy, Dad. But Mom made choices that hurt all of us. If she's going to face consequences for those choices, they should be based on the truth. And if she tries to reconcile, if she apologizes and wants to work things out, Emma's expression hardened. Dad, she's been planning this for months. She stole from Jake and me, lied to our faces, and tried to manipulate us into supporting her affair. Some things can't be fixed with apologies. As I watched my daughter walk out of my office, I realized that Sarah's betrayal had cost her more than she could possibly imagine. She'd gained a wealthy boyfriend and the promise of a new life, but she'd lost the love and respect of the people who should have mattered most. The children she'd claimed to be protecting had chosen their father over their mother. Not because I'd asked them to, but because they'd seen clearly what kind of person Sarah had become. The call from Jennifer Patterson came on Monday morning, and her tone was noticeably different from our previous conversation. "Mr. Harrison, I'm calling to inform you that there have been some developments in your wife's case that require clarification." "What kind of developments?" "It appears there may have been some misunderstandings about the scope of marital assets. My client is prepared to file an amended petition that provides a more complete financial picture." I almost smiled. "More complete in what way?" "Well, it seems there were some business assets and accounts that weren't included in the original filing. My client wants to ensure full transparency moving forward." "That's very noble of her," I said. "What prompted this sudden interest in transparency?" There was a pause. "Mr. Harrison, I think it would be beneficial for all parties if we could resolve this matter without extensive litigation. Perhaps we could arrange a settlement conference." "I'm certainly open to discussions, Ms. Patterson. But any settlement would need to address not just the asset division, but also the question of why those assets were omitted from the original filing. I understand your concerns. My client is prepared to acknowledge that there were some oversights in the initial documentation." "Oversights? That was one way to describe systematic fraud. I'll discuss your proposal with my attorney and get back to you." After I hung up, I called David Chen immediately. "She's panicking," David said after I recounted the conversation. "Patterson probably reviewed the evidence we provided and realized her client lied to her about everything. No attorney wants to be associated with perjury and fraud." "What do you think Sarah told her?" "Probably some story about being confused or overwhelmed. But Patterson's smart enough to know the difference between confusion and calculated deception. The fact that she's calling about an amended petition means she's trying to find a way for Sarah to avoid criminal charges." That afternoon, I received a call from Emma. She was crying, which immediately put me on alert. "Dad, something's wrong with my student account. All my classes have been dropped and there's a hold on my registration for non-payment." "What? That's impossible. I'll call the financial aid office right away." "I already called them," they said. "A payment that was supposed to process last week was reversed." "Dad, I'm going to lose my spot in my senior seminars if we can't fix this immediately." I felt rage building in my chest. "Emma, don't worry. I'll handle this. Can you get to the financial aid office in person?" "I'm here now." "Good. I'm going to call them directly and authorize payment from a different account. This will be resolved." Within an hour, after I handled Emma's situation, I called Jake at Duke. His account showed the same problem. Payments that had been processed were suddenly reversed, leaving him with outstanding balances and holds on his registration. It didn't take long to trace the problem. Sarah had access to the education savings account I'd been using for tuition payments. In a final act of vindictiveness, she'd reversed the payments for both children's spring semester expenses, leaving them scrambling to maintain their enrollment. I called David Chen immediately. "She's using your children as weapons," David said. After I explained the situation, "This is beyond vindictive, it's cruel. Can we stop her from accessing those accounts? We can file for emergency relief, but that takes time. In the meantime, I'd recommend paying the colleges directly from accounts she can't access." "Already done." "But David, this proves something important, doesn't it? This proves she was never concerned about our children's welfare. It proves she's willing to sabotage their education to hurt you. That's going to be very useful in court." That evening, Sarah called me directly for the first time since she'd left the house. "Michael, we need to talk." "I'm listening. I know you're angry, and I understand why, but what you're doing is going to hurt Emma and Jake more than it hurts me." "What I'm doing?" "Sarah, you just sabotaged our children's education. You reversed their tuition payments in the middle of the semester. I was trying to get your attention. I was trying to make you understand that we need to work together instead of fighting through lawyers. You were trying to hurt me by hurting our children. There's a difference." "Michael, please. I know I made mistakes, but this legal battle is going to destroy our family. Our family was destroyed the moment you decided to steal from it to fund an affair." There was a long pause. "I want to come home. I want us to try to work this out." "Sarah, you filed for divorce. You committed perjury in legal documents. You stole over $100,000 from our marriage. You can't just decide to work it out because your plan backfired. I'll give the money back. I'll end things with Richard. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." "It's too late for that." "It's not too late, Michael. We've been together for 23 years. That has to count for something." I thought about the woman I'd married, the one who used to believe in our dreams and support my ambitions. Then I thought about the emails between Sarah and Richard, the cold calculation of her theft, the way she'd manipulated our children. "Sarah, you told me yourself that you settled for me. You said I wasn't the man you thought you were marrying. You said I was ordinary and you deserved better." I was angry when I said those things. I didn't mean them. "Yes, you did. And you know what? You were right about one thing. You do deserve consequences for your choices." "Michael, please don't do this. If you pursue criminal charges, if you drag this through court, it will destroy me. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy our marriage." "What about Emma and Jake? Do you want them to watch their mother go to prison?" "I want them to see that actions have consequences. I want them to understand that love doesn't involve lies, theft, and betrayal. After Sarah hung up, I sat in my office thinking about her offer to reconcile. 6 months ago, if she'd come to me with concerns about our marriage, if she'd been honest about her feelings, we might have been able to work through our problems. We had the resources to change our lifestyle, to travel, to have the experiences she craved. But Sarah hadn't chosen honesty. She'd chosen deception, theft, and betrayal. She'd systematically planned the destruction of our marriage while lying to my face every day. And now, faced with consequences, she wanted to pretend it had all been a misunderstanding. The next morning, Webb called with an update that made Sarah's desperation even more understandable. Michael, I have some information about Richard Castellano that you need to know. What is it? He's not as wealthy as he's been claiming. I did some deeper digging into his finances, and he's leveraged to the hilt. The properties Sarah mentioned, they're all mortgaged beyond their value. His investment business is being investigated by the SEC for possible fraud. You're telling me Sarah's been planning to leave me for a man who's on the verge of financial ruin? It gets worse. Castellano's been married twice since college. Both wives left him citing emotional abuse and financial manipulation. The second wife filed a restraining order that's still active. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Sarah had betrayed her family for a man who was essentially a con artist, someone who'd targeted her specifically because he needed access to money. There's more, Webb continued. Castellano's been encouraging Sarah to move assets out of the marriage. Some of the emails I obtained suggest he's been coaching her on how to hide money from divorce proceedings. So he's been using her to commit financial crimes. That's exactly what he's been doing. And when this all comes out in court, Sarah's going to realize she's been manipulated by someone who's probably worse than anything she accused you of being. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Sarah's situation was even more tragic than I'd understood. She'd destroyed her marriage, betrayed her children, and committed multiple felonies, all for a man who was using her for financial gain and would likely abandon her the moment she became a liability. But my sympathy for Sarah was limited. She was an adult who'd made choices with full knowledge of their consequences. The fact that she'd chosen poorly didn't absolve her of responsibility for the damage she'd caused. The phone rang again, and I saw it was Jennifer Patterson. Mr. Harrison, I need to inform you that I'm withdrawing as counsel for your wife. There are ethical issues that prevent me from continuing representation. I understand. I want you to know that Mrs. Harrison has been asked to find new counsel. Any communications going forward should be directed through her new attorney. After Patterson hung up, I realized that Sarah was now facing the consequences of her lies. Even with her own lawyer, no reputable attorney would want to represent someone who'd committed perjury in their initial filing and then tried to cover it up. Sarah had gambled everything on a plan that was built on deception. And now that plan was collapsing around her. She'd lost her husband, her children's respect, her lawyer, and quite possibly her freedom. And she'd done it all for a man who was using her just as ruthlessly as she'd tried to use me. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early May. Sarah had managed to find a new attorney, a recent graduate named Kevin Morrison, who specialized in what he diplomatically called challenging family law cases. From David's research, Morrison primarily represented clients who couldn't afford more experienced counsel, which, given Sarah's actual financial situation, was ironic. I arrived at the courthouse with David and a banker's box full of evidence. Financial records, email printouts, photographs from Webb's investigation, and sworn statements from Emma and Jake about their mother's lies regarding college expenses. Sarah was already there with Morrison, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen her in years. She'd lost weight, and her clothes, which I now realized had been bought with stolen money, hung loosely on her frame. When she saw me, she quickly looked away. Mr. Harrison, Judge Patricia Hensley called the case to order. I've reviewed the filings from both parties, and I must say this is one of the more complex asset division cases I've seen in 20 years on the bench. Judge Hensley was known for her no-nonsense approach to family law and her particular distaste for financial deception during divorce proceedings. Ms. Morrison, she continued, addressing Sarah's attorney, your client filed an initial petition claiming total marital assets of approximately $80,000. Mr. Chen, your client's response claims assets in excess of $3 million. Someone is dramatically mistaken about the facts, and I intend to find out who. Morrison stood nervously. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that there were some omissions in the initial filing. She was under tremendous emotional stress due to the failure of the family business and may have overlooked certain assets. Overlooked $3 million. Judge Hensley raised an eyebrow. That's quite an oversight. David stood to respond. Your Honor, we believe the evidence will show that Mrs. Harrison's omissions were not accidental but deliberate, and that she's been systematically moving marital assets to hidden accounts while conducting an extramarital affair. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Chen. I hope you have substantial evidence to support them. We do, Your Honor. For the next 2 hours, David methodically presented our case. Bank records showing Sarah's secret transfers, the college financial aid documents proving her theft of education funds, Webb's photographs of her meetings with Richard Castellano, and most damaging of all, printed copies of the emails between Sarah and Richard, detailing their plans to defraud the divorce proceedings. Morrison objected repeatedly, but he was clearly unprepared for the scope of evidence we'd assembled. Sarah sat silently, her face growing paler with each document David introduced. The most devastating moment came when David read aloud from Sarah's own emails. Your Honor, in an email dated March 15th, Mrs. Harrison wrote to Mr. Castellano, and, I quote, "The bankruptcy couldn't have come at a better time. Michael is so defeated and stressed that he's not paying attention to anything else. I've been able to move most of our liquid assets without him noticing. By the time his lawyer serves the papers, I'll have enough to start over properly." Judge Hensley leaned forward. Ms. Morrison, is your client claiming that this email is fabricated? Morrison looked at Sarah, who shook her head slightly. No, Your Honor, but the email was taken out of context. What context would make it appropriate for your client to celebrate her husband's supposed business failure while admitting to hiding marital assets? Morrison had no answer. David continued with more emails, each one more damaging than the last. Sarah's complaints about our mediocre lifestyle, her plans to claim poverty while hiding money, her manipulation of the children, and most damaging of all, her admission that the entire bankruptcy was perfect timing for her divorce strategy. When David finished presenting evidence, Judge Hensley called a 15-minute recess. As the courtroom cleared, I saw Sarah approach Morrison and whisper something urgently in his ear. He shook his head repeatedly, then threw up his hands in apparent frustration. When court reconvened, Morrison stood with obvious reluctance. Your Honor, my client would like to address the court directly. Mrs. Harrison, you understand that anything you say here is under oath. Sarah nodded and took the witness stand. For a moment, I thought she might confess everything and try to minimize the damage. Instead, she doubled down on her lies. Your Honor, I want to clarify what really happened. My husband has been emotionally abusive for years, controlling our finances and making me feel worthless. When his business started failing, I was terrified we'd lose everything. I stared at her in disbelief. She was actually claiming to be the victim. The money I moved to separate accounts was to protect our family in case Michael's creditors came after our assets. I was trying to save something for our children's education. Judge Hensley looked skeptical. Mrs. Harrison, how do you explain the emails to Mr. Castellano that we've just heard? I was confused and scared. Richard was an old friend who was helping me understand my legal options. Some of the things I wrote were taken out of context or misunderstood. And the college expense fraud, your children's financial aid offices, have confirmed that you were overcharging your husband by approximately $60,000 per year. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. There were additional expenses that Michael didn't understand. Books, living costs, emergency funds, Mrs. Harrison, Judge Hensley interrupted. I have documentation from both Northwestern and Duke showing the exact amounts due and paid. Are you telling me that both universities and their financial aid offices are mistaken about their own billing? Sarah stared at the judge for a long moment, and I could see her realizing that her lies were no longer sustainable. But instead of confessing, she made one final, desperate attempt at manipulation. Your Honor, I admit I made mistakes. I should have been more transparent about the money I was protecting. But Michael has been planning this whole thing for months. He pretended his business was failing just to test me. He hired private investigators to spy on me. He's been calculating and manipulative, and now he's trying to destroy me legally because I wanted to leave him. The courtroom was silent. Sarah had essentially confessed to financial fraud while simultaneously accusing me of entrapment. David stood immediately. Your Honor, Mrs. Harrison has just admitted to moving marital assets while claiming Mr. Harrison was bankrupt. Whether or not Mr. Harrison's business failure was real doesn't change the fact that she knowingly hid money during divorce proceedings. Judge Hensley nodded grimly. Mrs. Harrison, even if everything you've just said about your husband is true, it doesn't justify perjury in legal filings or the systematic theft of marital assets. You've essentially confessed to the charges against you while trying to blame your husband for discovering your crimes. Morrison stood desperately. Your Honor, my client has been under enormous stress. Mr. Morrison, stress doesn't excuse fraud. Mrs. Harrison has admitted to moving assets she now describes as protection money while filing legal documents claiming those assets didn't exist. That's perjury and contempt of court. Judge Hensley turned back to Sarah. Mrs. Harrison, I'm going to ask you one more time. Under oath, did you knowingly omit assets from your initial divorce filing? Sarah looked around the courtroom at me, at Morrison, at the court reporter. Recording every word, finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, yes. And did you move marital assets to accounts your husband didn't know about while claiming financial hardship? Yes. And did you inflate your children's educational expenses to justify these transfers? Sarah closed her eyes. Yes. Judge Hensley made notes on her pad, then looked up. Mrs. Harrison, I'm finding you in contempt of court for perjury in your initial filing. I'm also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution of financial fraud. Sarah's face went white. Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear. As for the divorce proceedings, Judge Hensley continued, given the evidence of systematic financial deception, I'm awarding Mr. Harrison 90% of all marital assets. Mrs. Harrison will receive 10%, minus restitution for the funds she misappropriated from her children's education accounts. Your Honor, Morrison stood weakly. That seems extremely punitive, Mr. Morrison. Your client stole from her own children while committing perjury in my courtroom. She's fortunate I'm not holding her in jail pending criminal charges. Judge Hensley turned to me. Mr. Harrison, do you wish to pursue criminal charges against your wife? I looked at Sarah, sitting in the witness box with tears streaming down her face, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not enough to let her escape consequences, but enough to show mercy where I could. Your Honor, I want full restitution for the stolen funds, and I want assurance that she won't have access to any accounts that could affect our children's welfare. Beyond that, I'll leave criminal prosecution to your discretion. Judge Hensley nodded. Very well, Mrs. Harrison. You have 30 days to provide full accounting of all hidden assets and to return the misappropriated education funds. Failure to comply will result in immediate criminal prosecution. As we left the courthouse, David shook my hand. Michael, that was one of the most complete vindications I've ever seen in family court. I nodded, but I felt no satisfaction in the victory. Sarah had destroyed herself so thoroughly that there was nothing left to fight against. She'd lost her marriage, her children's respect, her financial security, and quite possibly her freedom, all for a man who'd been using her as ruthlessly as she'd tried to use me. The truth had emerged, but it had come at a cost that would affect all of us for years to come. The story broke in the local newspaper 3 days after the court hearing. Local woman sentenced for divorce fraud read the headline in the Wednesday edition of the Millbrook Daily Herald. By Friday, it was the talk of the entire town. I discovered this when I stopped by Brennan's Hardware to pick up supplies for a weekend project. The moment I walked through the door, the conversation at the counter stopped abruptly. Tom Brennan, the owner, and Jim's older brother, looked up from the register with obvious discomfort. Michael, how are you holding up? I'm doing all right, Tom. Thanks for asking. The other customers, 2 contractors I'd known for years, and Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop suddenly found reasons to examine paint samples with intense interest. Listen, Tom continued, lowering his voice. If you need anything at all, you just let me know. What Sarah did well, it's got the whole town talking. I nodded, unsure how to respond. I'd known this moment would come, the moment when our private family crisis became public entertainment. I appreciate that, Tom. Really. As I gathered my supplies, I overheard fragments of whispered conversations. Can't believe she stole from her own kids. That poor man, 23 years of marriage, heard she's broke now, living in some apartment. The checkout process was awkward, with Tom trying to be supportive while clearly desperate for details I wasn't going to provide. When I finally left the hardware store, I understood that my life in Millbrook had changed permanently. I was no longer just Michael Harrison, local contractor. I was Michael Harrison, the man whose wife had committed fraud to fund an affair. The phone calls started that evening. First from Linda Morrison, our former neighbor, who claimed to be checking on my welfare, but was obviously fishing for gossip. Michael, I just wanted you to know that the whole neighborhood is supporting you. We always thought Sarah seemed a little ambitious for small-town life. Then came calls from former friends of Sarah's, women who'd been part of her book club and garden society, all suddenly eager to share their suspicions about her behavior. I always wondered where she got the money for those expensive clothes, confided Janet Walsh. In that trip to New York last fall, she said it was for a conference. But who has conferences at luxury hotels? The most surprising call came from Dr. Morrison, the surgeon whose wife Linda had made Sarah feel inadequate about our lifestyle. Michael, I owe you an apology. Linda told me what happened, and it made me think about some conversations I had with Sarah over the years. She used to ask a lot of questions about our investments, our properties, our income. At the time, I thought she was just being friendly. But now you think she was sizing up your lifestyle. I think she was comparing it to yours and finding you wanting, which is ironic, because from what I understand, you were doing better financially than most people in town realized. That was the part that stung most about the community reaction, the assumption that Sarah had left me because I wasn't successful enough, when the truth was that she'd left despite our success. The weekend brought more awkward encounters. At the grocery store, at the gas station, at church, everywhere I went. People either stared with poorly concealed curiosity or approached with aggressive sympathy that felt more intrusive than supportive. The worst encounter came at Caf Milano, the coffee shop where Webb had photographed Sarah with Richard. I'd stopped in for my usual Saturday morning coffee when I noticed the conversations around me gradually dying down. The barista, a young woman named Kelly, who'd always been friendly, looked uncomfortable as she prepared my order. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, "I just wanted you to know that we're all really sorry about what happened." I thanked her and was turning to leave when a voice behind me said, Well, if it isn't the town hero, I turned to see Richard Castellano sitting at a corner table, looking far less polished than he had in the photographs Webb had shown me. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes, or the fact that he'd clearly been drinking, despite it being 10 a.m. Richard, I presume. The one and only. I thought it was time we met face to face. Every eye in the cafe was on us now. I could have walked away, should have walked away, but something in his arrogant tone made me reconsider. What brings you to Millbrook? I thought you'd moved on to easier targets. His smile faltered slightly. Easier targets. That's rich, coming from a man who set up his own wife to fail. I didn't set Sarah up to commit fraud, Richard. I just gave her an opportunity to show who she really was. And who she really was, apparently, was someone too good for a small-town nobody like you. The cafe had gone completely silent. Kelly looked like she wanted to call the police. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. Sarah was too good for me. The woman I married 23 years ago, the one who supported my dreams and believed in our future together, she was definitely too good for me. Unfortunately, that woman apparently died years ago and was replaced by someone who thought stealing from her own children was acceptable behavior. Richard's face flushed red. You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I? I know you encouraged her to move assets out of the marriage. I know you coached her on hiding money from divorce proceedings. I know you used her to commit financial crimes. And I know you're about to abandon her now that she's become a liability. That's not it, is exactly what's happening. Because here you are, Richard, sitting in a coffee shop in the town you supposedly couldn't wait to escape with. Sarah, drinking alone at 10 a.m. instead of supporting the woman who destroyed her life for you? Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You think you won, don't you? You think you're some kind of victim here? I think I'm a man who discovered that his wife was capable of things he never imagined. Just like you're discovering that Sarah's capable of things you never imagined, like expecting you to actually follow through on the promises you made. What's that supposed to mean? It means she's called you, hasn't she? She's asked for help with her legal fees, with her living expenses, with the restitution she owes. And you've told her you can't get involved, that you need to protect yourself, that it's too risky. The look on Richard's face told me I'd hit the mark exactly. She sacrificed everything for you, Richard, her marriage, her children's respect, her financial security, her reputation. And now that she needs you most, you're nowhere to be found. Richard grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, but I wasn't finished. By the way, Richard, you might want to check with your lawyer about those SEC investigations. Something about fraudulent investment schemes. Sarah might not be the only one facing criminal charges soon. He paused at the door, his shoulders tense, then walked out without responding. The cafe remained silent for several more seconds before conversations gradually resumed. Kelly approached me with my coffee. Mr. Harrison, that was intense. That was justice, I said quietly. As I drove home, I realized that the encounter with Richard had crystallized something important about the community reaction to our divorce. People weren't just gossiping about Sarah's crimes, they were trying to understand how a marriage that had seemed stable could implode so spectacularly. The truth was that our marriage hadn't been as stable as it appeared. Sarah had been dissatisfied for years, but instead of addressing her concerns honestly, she'd chosen deception and betrayal. The community was struggling to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the woman who'd committed fraud to fund an affair. That evening, Emma called with news that perfectly encapsulated the strange new reality we were living in. Dad, you're not going to believe this. Sarah Morrison, Dr. Morrison's daughter who goes to Northwestern, approached me today and asked if I wanted to join her sorority. Apparently, the whole campus knows about Mom's trial, and Sarah Morrison thinks I'm inspiring for standing by you. How do you feel about that? Honestly, it's weird. I don't want to be known as the girl whose mother committed fraud, but I also don't want people to think what Mom did reflects on you or Jake or me. What did you tell Sarah Morrison? I told her I appreciated the offer, but I prefer to be known for my own accomplishments rather than my family drama. Emma's maturity continued to amaze me. She was handling the public attention with more grace than many adults would have managed. Dad, there's something else. I heard from Jake today. Duke's financial aid office called him in for a meeting. Apparently, they want to use our situation as a case study for recognizing when families might be committing education fraud. How does Jake feel about that? He said he'd participate if it helps other students avoid what we went through. But Dad, it's strange being the victims in a fraud case that everyone wants to study. That night, as I sat in my quiet house, the house Sarah had been willing to let me keep because she thought it would be foreclosed, Apanya reflected on how completely our lives had changed. 6 months ago, we'd been a normal family with normal problems. Now we were the subject of newspaper articles, legal case studies, and coffee shop confrontations. But perhaps most significantly, the community reaction had revealed something I hadn't expected. Support? Not just sympathy for my situation, but genuine respect for how I'd handled Sarah's betrayal. People weren't just talking about what Sarah had done wrong, they were talking about what I'd done right. Tom Brennan had summed it up perfectly when he'd called me that evening. Michael, what happened to you could have happened to any of us, but how you handled it protecting your kids, standing up for yourself, refusing to let her get away with it. That takes character. This town respects character. Sarah had thought she was escaping to a better life, one where she'd be respected for her association with wealth and status. Instead, she'd lost the respect of everyone who'd known her, while I'd gained a reputation for integrity and strength. The irony was bitter but complete. In trying to improve her social standing, Sarah had destroyed it entirely, and in the process, she'd revealed the difference between respect that's earned and respect that's bought. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after my encounter with Richard at the cafe. It was handwritten on cream-colored stationery. Sarah's careful script, unmistakable, even though her usually perfect penmanship looked shaky. "Michael," it began, "I know I have no right to ask for your time or attention, but I'm hoping you'll read this letter completely before deciding whether to respond." I sat in my office with my morning coffee, studying the envelope. It had been mailed from a local address, an apartment complex on the other side of town that I knew rented mostly to people going through divorces or facing financial difficulties. I want to start by saying something I should have said months ago. I'm sorry. Not sorry that I got caught. Not sorry that my plans didn't work out. But genuinely sorry for the pain I've caused you, Emma, and Jake. I continued reading, curious despite myself about what Sarah thought an apology could accomplish at this point. "I know you probably won't believe this, but I've been seeing a therapist since the court hearing. Dr. Amanda Cross specializes in helping people understand why they make destructive choices. I wanted to understand how I became someone capable of stealing from my own children." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing Sarah's therapy sessions and her growing awareness of how her choices had affected our family. She wrote about feeling inadequate and trapped, about convincing herself that she deserved better without considering what she already had. Dr. Cross helped me realize that I spent years building resentment instead of addressing my unhappiness directly. I convinced myself that you were holding me back, that our life was somehow beneath me, when the truth is that I was just scared of being ordinary. This was new territory for actual self-reflection instead of justification or blame. The money I moved to separate accounts, the lies about college expenses, the affair with Richard, none of it was really about money or love. It was about proving to myself that I was special, that I deserved a life that other people would envy. I paused in my reading, struck by the honesty of that admission. Sarah had never been able to admit that her actions were about ego rather than genuine dissatisfaction. "I want you to know that Richard is gone, not just from my life, but from the state. It turns out that everything you said at the cafe was true. He's facing federal charges for investment fraud. His lawyer advised him to avoid contact with anyone involved in related legal cases. So much for the great love affair that I destroyed, our marriage to pursue." I felt a mixture of vindication and pity. Sarah had sacrificed everything for a man who'd disappeared the moment she became inconvenient. I'm not writing this letter to ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. I understand that I destroyed any possibility of that when I chose to lie and steal instead of talking to you about my feelings. I'm writing because our children deserve to understand why their mother became someone they couldn't respect. The final page was the most difficult to read. "Michael, you asked me once if I ever really loved you, and I gave you a cruel answer. The truth is more complicated. I loved the idea of who I thought you should become, and when you didn't become that person, I convinced myself that you had failed me somehow. But you didn't fail me. I failed myself by expecting you to be responsible for my happiness instead of taking responsibility for my own life," she continued. "You were exactly who you said you were from the beginning, a good man who worked hard and loved his family. The problem was never with you. The problem was that I stopped appreciating what we had and started obsessing over what we didn't have." The letter concluded with specific information about the restitution payments she was making and her current living situation. She was working as a receptionist at a medical office, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and using every spare dollar to pay back the money she'd stolen. I know this letter doesn't change anything, and I'm not asking it to. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost and why I lost it. Emma and Jake have a father they can be proud of. I hope someday they'll have a mother they can forgive. I set the letter down and stared out my office window at the garden Sarah had planted 3 years ago. The roses were blooming, tended now by a landscaping service, since neither of us had time to maintain them properly. The letter felt genuine in a way that nothing Sarah had said during our marriage's final months had felt. But it also felt too late, not just legally, but emotionally. The woman who'd written this thoughtful, self-aware apology was someone I might have been able to work with, might have been able to forgive. But she was also someone who'd only emerged after Sarah had lost everything. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Emma. "Dad, did you get a letter from Mom today?" "You got one too." Jake and I both did. Hers were longer than yours. I think she spent a lot of time explaining her therapy and apologizing for the way she manipulated us. "How do you feel about it?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "Relieved, I guess. For months, I've been wondering if Mom was completely sociopathic, or if there was some part of her that realized how badly she'd hurt people. This letter makes me think she's at least capable of understanding what she did wrong. Does it change how you feel about her?" "Not really. I mean, I'm glad she's getting help, and I'm glad she's paying you back. But Dad, she made choices for months that hurt all of us. An apology doesn't undo that damage. What about Jake? Jake's angrier than I am. He said Mom's letter felt like she was trying to make us feel sorry for her. He thinks she's only sorry because her plan didn't work out. That evening, Jake called me directly. Dad, I need to ask you something about Mom's letter. What is it? Do you think she's really changed? Or do you think this is just another manipulation? It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with myself. Jake, I think your mother is capable of genuine remorse, but I also think she's only experiencing that remorse because she lost everything. If her plan had worked, if she'd successfully hidden the money and married Richard, I don't think she'd be writing apology letters. So you don't trust her. I don't trust her motives. Even this letter part of me wonders if she's hoping we'll speak well of her to the judge when she's sentenced. That's what I thought too. Dad, I wrote her back. What did you say? I told her that I appreciated the apology, but that I wasn't ready to have a relationship with her yet. I said maybe someday we could try to rebuild something, but it would have to be based on her actions over time, not just her words in therapy. I felt proud of Jake's maturity. He was 19 years old and handling this situation with more wisdom than many adults would have shown. How did you decide what to say? I talked to Emma about it, and we agreed that we don't want to be cruel, but we also don't want to pretend that an apology fixes everything. We figured honesty was better than false forgiveness. 2 days later, I received a second letter from Sarah, much shorter than the first. Michael, I understand that you may not want to respond to my letters, but I wanted to thank you for not pursuing criminal charges beyond what the court required. My lawyer tells me that your decision probably kept me out of prison. I know I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm grateful for it anyway. She concluded. I won't write again unless you indicate that you want me to. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone worthy of whatever forgiveness our children might eventually offer. I folded the letter and put it in the same drawer where I kept the divorce decree and the restitution agreements. Physical evidence of the end of one life and the beginning of another. That night, as I prepared for bed in the house that had once been our family home, I realized that Sarah's letters had given me something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not the closure of forgiveness or reconciliation, but the closure of understanding. I finally knew why she'd made the choices she'd made, and I finally believed that she understood the consequences of those choices. It didn't change the past, and it didn't erase the damage she'd caused. But it did allow me to stop wondering whether the woman I'd married had ever existed, or whether our entire marriage had been built on deception. The woman I'd married had existed. She'd just been buried under years of resentment, entitlement, and fear of being ordinary. Sarah's destruction of our marriage had been tragic, but it hadn't been inevitable. It had been the result of bad choices that had cost her everything she'd once claimed to value. And that knowledge, somehow, made it easier to move forward. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting in David Chung's office again, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Instead of discussing Sarah's fraud and betrayal, we were reviewing documents for a new venture, something I'd never imagined pursuing during my marriage. Michael, the foundation structure looks solid, David said, reviewing the papers spread across his desk. The Harrison Family Education Foundation will be able to provide scholarships for students whose families have experienced financial fraud or domestic deception. It felt fitting. The money Sarah had stolen and tried to hide would now help other families avoid the kind of educational disruption Emma and Jake had experienced. The initial endowment of $500,000 should fund 10 to 15 scholarships annually, I said. And if the foundation grows the way we hope, we can expand the program. David smiled. It's a good way to turn something negative into something positive. The foundation wasn't my only new venture. Harrison Construction had evolved too, partly out of necessity and partly out of opportunity. The publicity around the divorce, uncomfortable as it had been, had actually brought me new clients who respected how I'd handled the situation. People want to work with someone they can trust. My brother David had explained during one of our partnership meetings, and you've proven that you're willing to sacrifice personal comfort to do the right thing. The business was expanding into commercial renovation projects. The kind of work that would have required travel and longer hours, exactly the kind of expansion Sarah had once claimed she wanted, but that I'd been reluctant to pursue because I'd thought she valued stability over growth. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that I was free to make business decisions without considering Sarah's supposed preferences, I was building exactly the kind of company she'd claimed to want me to have. But the most significant change in my life wasn't professional, it was personal. Her name was Rebecca Chen, David's younger sister and a high school English teacher who'd moved back to Millbrook the previous year to care for her aging parents. We'd met at a town council meeting where she was advocating for increased funding for the school library, because I'd ended up supporting both personally and through my business. Michael Harrison, she'd said after my presentation to the council, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Rebecca Chen, and I wanted to thank you for supporting our library initiative. Rebecca was different from Sarah in every way that mattered. Where Sarah had been focused on appearances and status, Rebecca cared about substance and community. Where Sarah had been calculating in her relationships, Rebecca was genuine, and where Sarah had seen my work as somehow beneath her aspirations, Rebecca respected the contribution I made to our community, that our relationship had developed slowly, carefully. Neither of us was interested in rushing into anything serious, and we both understood that I was still processing the end of my marriage. But there was an ease between us that I'd forgotten was possible. The thing I appreciate about you, Rebecca, I had told me during one of our early dinner dates, is that you're comfortable with who you are. You don't need to be someone else to feel worthy. It was a simple observation, but it highlighted everything that had gone wrong with Sarah. She'd never been comfortable with who she was, and she'd expected me to fill the gaps in her self-esteem. An impossible task that had ultimately poisoned our marriage. Rebecca and I had been dating for 3 months when Emma came home for winter break and met her for the first time. "Dad, she's really nice," Emma said after Rebecca had left following a family dinner. "She actually listened when I talked about my senior thesis, and she asked intelligent questions. Mom used to just nod and change the subject. You approve?" I approve of you being happy," Emma said. "And Dad, you seem happy. Really happy. Not just making the best of things happy." She was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to manage someone else's disappointment or anxiety about our life. I could simply enjoy the life I'd built. Jake's reaction was equally positive, though characteristically blunt. "Dad, Rebecca seems like the kind of person who'd love you, even if you really were poor," which was supposed to be Mom's thing. The comment stung, but it also crystallized something important. Rebecca had known about my wealth from the beginning. David had undoubtedly told her about our business partnership, but she'd also seen me at my most vulnerable, dealing with the aftermath of Sarah's betrayal. Her interest in me wasn't based on my financial success or my social status. It was based on who I was as a person. One evening, in late November, Rebecca and I were having dinner at her house when she brought up something I'd been avoiding. "Michael, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you worried that what happened with Sarah will happen again? That someone else might pretend to love you for the wrong reasons?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with in therapy. I'd started seeing Dr. Martinez, a counselor who specialized in helping people recover from intimate betrayal, shortly after the divorce was finalized. "I think about it," I admitted, "but Dr. Martinez has helped me understand that Sarah's betrayal says more about her character than about my judgment. I can't control whether someone chooses to lie to me, but I can control how I respond when I discover lies." "And how would you respond?" "I'd address it immediately, instead of hoping it would resolve itself. I'd trust my instincts instead of making excuses for behavior that didn't feel right." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "The thing is, Michael, I don't think you have to worry about that with most people. What Sarah did, the systematic planning, the theft, the manipulation, that's not normal behavior. Most people who fall out of love don't become criminals." She was right, but the betrayal had left me cautious in ways I was still working through. "I keep thinking I should have seen the signs," I said. "The way she talked about other people's lifestyles, the way she seemed embarrassed by our life together, the way she started pulling away from our family activities. Maybe you should have, or maybe those signs were only obvious in retrospect. But Michael, even if you had confronted her earlier, do you really think it would have changed anything? She was already planning to leave. She was already stealing money. She was already having an affair." Rebecca's directness was refreshing after years of Sarah's indirect communication and hidden agendas. "The question isn't whether you could have prevented her betrayal," she continued. "The question is what you're going to do with the knowledge you've gained." "What do you mean?" "I mean you've learned that you're stronger than you thought, that your children respect your integrity, that your community values your character, and that you can build a good life even after someone tries to destroy the one you had." That night, driving home from Rebecca's house, I realized she was right. The past year had been devastating, but it had also been instructive. I'd discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. I'd learned that my children's love was based on who I was rather than what I could provide. I'd found that my community respected authenticity more than wealth. Most importantly, I'd learned that Sarah's inability to appreciate our life said nothing about the value of that life. Her need for something bigger, shinier, more impressive had blinded her to the genuine happiness that had been available to her all along. As I pulled into my driveway of the house Sarah had been willing to let me keep because she'd thought it was worthless, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Gratitude. Not for Sarah's betrayal, but for the clarity it had provided. I was building a new life. One based on honesty instead of hidden resentment. On genuine appreciation instead of constant comparison to others. On real love instead of transactional relationships. And for the first time since this nightmare began, that new life felt not just possible, but promising. The final divorce decree arrived on a gray February morning, almost exactly 1 year after Sarah had made her comment about loving me even if I were poor. The official stamp from the court made everything final: the asset division, the restitution payments, and the end of a 23-year marriage. I was reviewing the document in my office when David Chen called with news about Sarah's sentencing hearing. "Michael, I wanted to give you a heads up. Sarah's attorney called this morning. She's scheduled for sentencing next week, and they're asking if you want to provide a victim impact statement. I'd been dreading this decision for months. The prosecutor had offered me the opportunity to address the court about how Sarah's crimes had affected our family, but I wasn't sure what purpose it would serve. What would you recommend? That depends on what you want to accomplish. If you want maximum punishment, a detailed statement about the emotional and financial damage could influence the judge. If you want to show mercy, you could ask for leniency, or you could decline to participate. What's she likely to receive either way? Given her cooperation with restitution and her lack of prior criminal history, probably 2 to 3 years probation, community service, and continued financial supervision. The judge might add jail time if she feels Sarah hasn't shown genuine remorse. That evening, I called Emma and Jake to discuss the victim impact statement. Both were home for winter break, and we'd been making an effort to have regular family conversations about how we were all processing the aftermath of Sarah's betrayal. I think you should speak at the hearing, Emma said without hesitation. Not to hurt Mom more, but to make sure the judge understands how her choices affected all of us. Jake was more conflicted. Dad, I keep going back and forth on this. Part of me wants her to face real consequences, but part of me thinks she's already lost everything that mattered. What do you mean? I mean, she lost her marriage, her kids' respect, her home, her financial security, her social standing, everything she thought she wanted when she started this whole mess. Maybe that's punishment enough. Emma disagreed. Jake, she didn't just hurt Dad, she hurt us too. She stole from our education, lied to our faces, and tried to manipulate us into supporting her affair. Those are crimes, not just personal failures. It was Rebecca who helped me find clarity. We were walking through Riverside Park on a Sunday afternoon when I brought up my struggle with the victim impact statement. Michael, what would you want the judge to understand about what Sarah did? I'd want her to understand that it wasn't just about money. Sarah didn't steal because she was desperate or because we were struggling financially. She stole because she felt entitled to a different life and was willing to destroy people to get it. Then that's what you should say, but I don't want to be vindictive. Holding someone accountable for their choices isn't vindictive, it's justice. Rebecca was right. Sarah had made calculated decisions to commit crimes against her own family. The consequences of those decisions shouldn't be minimized just because she was now facing the results of her actions. I spent the next week writing my statement, trying to capture not just the financial impact of Sarah's crimes, but the emotional devastation of discovering that someone I'd trusted completely had been systematically betraying that trust. The sentencing hearing was held on a Thursday morning in the same courtroom where our divorce had been finalized. Sarah looked smaller than ever, wearing a simple blue dress and minimal makeup. She'd lost considerable weight over the past year, and the stress of the legal proceedings showed clearly on her face. Judge Hensley called me to the witness stand to read my victim impact statement. Sarah watched me approach, her eyes filled with what appeared to be genuine regret though. I'd learned not to trust my ability to read her expressions. Your Honor, I began, I want to start by saying that I don't take any pleasure in being here today. The woman sitting at the defendant's table was my wife for 23 years, the mother of my children, and someone I trusted with my life, my heart, and my financial security. I looked directly at Sarah as I continued. But she was also someone who systematically stole from our family, lied under oath in legal proceedings, and manipulated our children to cover her crimes. The financial damage was significant, over $200,000 in theft and fraud, but the emotional damage was devastating. I described the impact on Emma and Jake, the way Sarah's lies had forced them to question everything they thought they knew about their family. I talked about the community fallout, the embarrassment of having our private business become public scandal, and the ongoing trust issues I was working through in therapy. Your Honor, I believe in redemption and second chances. Sarah has been paying restitution consistently, and she appears to be genuinely remorseful for her actions. But I also believe that consequences should match the scope of someone's choices. I concluded by asking the court to consider not just the financial crimes, but the betrayal of trust that had made those crimes possible. Sarah's attorney then called her to make a statement to the court. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her hands shaking as she was sworn in. Your Honor, I want to begin by acknowledging the pain I've caused my family and taking full responsibility for my actions. For the next 10 minutes, Sarah spoke about her therapy, her growing understanding of how her choices had hurt people, and her commitment to making amends. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize her behavior. Instead, she offered what seemed like genuine accountability. I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the damage I've caused, she concluded, but I want the court to know that I understand the seriousness of what I did, and I'm committed to spending whatever time I have left trying to become someone worthy of my children's eventual forgiveness. Judge Hensley deliberated for nearly 20 minutes before delivering her sentence. Mrs. Harrison, you committed serious crimes against your own family members over an extended period of time. The systematic nature of your fraud, combined with your initial attempts to lie under oath, represents a significant betrayal of trust. Sarah stood with her attorney, her face pale but composed. However, I also note your cooperation with restitution, your genuine efforts at rehabilitation, and the fact that you ultimately confessed to your crimes rather than forcing a trial. Judge Hensley sentenced Sarah to 3 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and continued restitution payments until the full amount was recovered. She also mandated continued therapy and prohibited Sarah from accessing any financial accounts without court supervision. Mrs. Harrison, I want to be clear about something. Your family has shown you considerable mercy by not pursuing all available criminal charges. I hope you understand how fortunate you are to have their compassion, even after the pain you caused them. As we left the courthouse, Sarah approached me in the hallway. Her attorney looked nervous, probably worried about what she might say that could complicate her probation. Michael, thank you for not asking for jail time. I didn't do it for you, Sarah. I did it for Emma and Jake. They don't need the additional trauma of having their mother in prison. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I know. I also know that I'll probably never have the chance to really make this up to you or the kids. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. Sarah, the best thing you can do for Emma and Jake is to become someone they can eventually respect again. Not someone who needs their forgiveness, but someone who deserves it. I understand. As I walked away from the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Closure. Not the false closure of forgiveness or reconciliation, but the real closure of justice served and accountability accepted. Sarah would face the consequences of her choices, but those consequences were proportionate and fair. She would have the opportunity to rebuild her life, but she would do so under supervision and with the understanding that her actions had lasting effects on people who had trusted her. Most importantly, Emma, Jake, and I could move forward knowing that the truth had been acknowledged and that justice had been served. We could heal without the burden of unanswered questions or unaddressed wrongs. That evening, the three of us had dinner together at home, something that had become a cherished tradition since the divorce. As we sat around the kitchen table where this nightmare had begun with Sarah's casual comment about loving me even if I were poor, I realized how much stronger we'd become as a family. Dad, Emma said as we cleared the dishes, I'm proud of how you handled everything. The statement today, the way you've treated Mom throughout this process, the way you've protected Jake and me from the worst of it, shown us what integrity looks like. Jake nodded in agreement. And Dad, I think Mom finally understands what she lost, not just the money or the house, but the respect of people who really loved her. As I looked at my children, these remarkable young adults who'd navigated an impossible situation with wisdom beyond their years, I felt grateful for the painful lessons we'd all learned. We'd learned that love without honesty is worthless, that trust once broken requires years to rebuild, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable for their actions. But we'd also learned that families can survive betrayal, that integrity matters more than appearances, and that starting over can sometimes lead to something better than what came before. The healing wasn't completed, might never be complete, but it was real, and it was ours. 2 years later, I stood in the backyard of the house Sarah had once been willing to let me keep, watching Rebecca plant roses in the garden bed that had been neglected since the divorce. The spring air was warm, and Emma and Jake were both home for what had become our annual family expansion weekend, a celebration we'd started to mark positive changes in our lives. This year's celebration was particularly significant. Jake had just been accepted to law school, with a full scholarship funded partly by the Harrison Family Education Foundation. Emma had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern and been accepted to a prestigious graduate program in social work. And I had news of my own to share. Dad, are you going to help us plant these roses, or are you just going to stand there grinning like an idiot? Emma called from across the garden. I laughed and joined them in the dirt, something I realized I'd been doing more often since Rebecca came into my life. Laughing, I mean. The simple pleasure of it had been one of the casualties of my marriage to Sarah, though I hadn't recognized that until it returned. Actually, I wanted to talk to you both about something, I said, settling onto a garden bench that Rebecca had convinced me to buy. Something important. Jake looked up from the rosebush he was wrestling with. Please tell me you're not having a midlife crisis and buying a motorcycle. No motorcycle, but I did want to talk to you about Rebecca. Emma and Jake exchanged glances. They'd been waiting for this conversation for months, probably wondering why I was taking so long to propose to a woman who clearly made me happier than I'd been in years. Dad, Emma said gently, we love Rebecca. If you're asking for our permission to marry her, you have it. You've had it for about a year. I'm not asking for permission, I said. I'm asking for your thoughts about timing. What do you mean? Jake asked. I mean, it's been 2 years since the divorce was finalized. Is that enough time? Are you both comfortable with the idea of me remarrying? Rebecca looked up from her planting soil on her hands and curiosity in her eyes. We'd discussed marriage, in general terms, but I hadn't told her I was ready to make it official. Dad, Emma said, you've been ready to remarry for 6 months. We've been waiting for you to figure that out. Jake nodded in agreement. Besides, it's not like you're rushing into anything. You and Rebecca have been together for 1.5 years. You've been through the therapy, you've worked through the trust issues, and you've built something that looks nothing like what you had with Mom." He was right. My relationship with Rebecca was built on fundamentally different principles than my marriage to Sarah had been. Where Sarah and I had grown apart over time, Rebecca and I seemed to grow closer. Where Sarah had hidden her feelings and expectations, Rebecca was direct and honest about both her needs and her boundaries. Most importantly, Rebecca loved the life we were building together, instead of resenting it for not being something else. "The thing is," I said, "I want to make sure this is about love and partnership, not about fear of being alone or need for validation." Rebecca wiped her hands on a towel and came to sit beside me on the bench. "Michael, can I say something?" I nodded. "I fell in love with you while you were still processing the worst betrayal of your life. I watched you handle Sarah's crimes with integrity and grace. I saw how you protected your children while holding their mother accountable. I witnessed your commitment to doing the right thing even when it was painful." She took my hand, ignoring the dirt on both of ours. "If I'd wanted someone who was afraid of being alone, I would have found someone desperate and clingy. If I'd wanted someone who needed validation, I would have found someone insecure and demanding. What I wanted was someone who knew who he was and what he stood for, even under pressure. That's what I found in you." Emma was smiling now, and Jake was trying not to laugh at my obvious nervousness. "Oh," Rebecca continued, "if you're asking whether I think you're ready to remarry, the answer is yes. If you're asking whether I'm ready to marry you, the answer is also yes. And if you're asking whether your children approve, I think you have your answer." "In that case," I said, reaching into my pocket for the small velvet box I'd been carrying, "for a week, Rebecca Chen, will you marry me?" The proposal wasn't elaborate or dramatic. No restaurant, no crowd, no grand gestures, just the four of us in a garden, surrounded by the life we'd built together after everything fell apart. "Yes," Rebecca said simply. "Of course, yes." Emma started crying immediately, and Jake was grinning broadly. As I slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger, I thought about how different this moment felt from my first proposal to Sarah in a fancy restaurant 25 years earlier. This felt real, solid, built on truth rather than hopes and assumptions. That evening, we called Rebecca's family to share the news, then settled into the living room for what had become our traditional family discussion time. These conversations had started during the worst period of the divorce as a way to make sure everyone was processing events healthily. Now they were simply a way to stay connected as we all moved forward with our lives. "Dad," Emma said, "I have something I want to share too." "What is it?" "I've been accepted to a specialized program in family trauma counseling. I want to work with families who've experienced financial fraud or intimate betrayal." I felt a surge of pride and pain at the same time. Emma's chosen career path was clearly influenced by her experience with her mother's crimes, but she was channeling that experience into something positive. "I'm proud of you," I said, "and I think you'll be excellent at helping other families navigate what we went through." Jake's announcement was equally significant. "I've decided to specialize in family law when I start law school. Specifically, I want to focus on protecting children's interests during complicated divorce proceedings." "Because of what happened with the college fraud?" Rebecca asked. "Partly, but also because Dad showed me what it looks like when someone prioritizes children's welfare over personal revenge. If I can help other kids avoid what Emma and I went through, that feels like a good use of my education." As I listened to my children describe their career plans, I realized that Sarah's betrayal had shaped all of us in unexpected ways. We'd been forced to grow stronger, more resilient, and more conscious of the importance of integrity in relationships. We've also learned to appreciate what we had instead of focusing on what we lacked. "There's something else I want to talk about," I said. "Something about forgiveness." The room got quiet. We'd discussed Sarah periodically over the past 2 years, but the topic was always delicate. "I got a letter from your mother last week. She's completed her community service, she's finished paying restitution, and her probation officer says she's been exemplary in meeting all her requirements." "How is she doing?" Emma asked quietly. "She's working full-time now, at a nonprofit that helps people rebuild their lives after making destructive choices. She's been in therapy consistently, and she says she's learning to be content with a simpler life." Jake was less sympathetic. "Good for her. That doesn't mean we have to have a relationship with her." "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "But I wanted you both to know that if you ever decide you want to try rebuilding something with her, I'll support that decision." "What about you, Dad?" Emma asked. "Do you forgive her?" It was a question I'd been wrestling with in therapy for months. I forgive her in the sense that I don't carry anger toward her anymore. I understand that she was struggling with things I couldn't see, and I believe she's genuinely remorseful for the pain she caused. I paused, trying to find the right words. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that what happened wasn't serious. And it doesn't mean I would ever trust her again or want a relationship with her. Some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. Rebecca squeezed my hand. "That sounds healthy to me. The point is," I continued, "we've all built good lives despite what Sarah did to our family. We've learned from her mistakes without letting them define us. That feels like the best possible outcome from a terrible situation." As the evening wound down, and we prepared for bed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years ago, I'd been a man testing his wife's love and discovering that his entire marriage was built on deception. Tonight, I was an engaged man surrounded by a family that had grown stronger through adversity. The house was the same, but everything else had changed. Where there had once been hidden resentment, there was now open communication. Where there had been financial secrecy, there was complete transparency. Where there had been manipulation and lies, there was trust and honesty. Most importantly, where there had been a woman who saw our life as inadequate, there was now a woman who saw it as full of possibility. I thought about Sarah's comment that had started this whole journey, "I'd love you even if you were poor." At the time, I'd heard it as a declaration of unconditional love. Later, I'd understood it as a subtle expression of dissatisfaction with our lifestyle. Now I realized that the woman sleeping beside me loved me not despite my circumstances, but because of who I was within those circumstances. She didn't need me to be wealthy or important or impressive to other people. She just needed me to be honest, kind, and committed to building something real together. That night, as I drifted off to sleep in the home I'd almost lost, surrounded by a family that had survived everything Sarah could throw at us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete contentment, not the complacency that Sarah had found so disappointing, but the deep satisfaction of a life built on solid foundations. Love based on truth rather than illusion. Success measured by integrity rather than comparison to others. Happiness rooted in appreciation rather than constant striving for something better. Sarah had been right. About one thing, she did deserve better than what we'd had together. But what she'd deserved wasn't a wealthier husband or a more impressive lifestyle. What she'd deserved was the honesty to recognize that the problem wasn't with our marriage, but with her inability to appreciate the good things in her life. Now she was learning that lesson the hard way. While the rest of us were building something better from the wreckage of her choices, it wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I'd first decided to test Sarah's love, but it was the ending we deserved. Honest, hopeful, and built on the foundation of hard-earned wisdom, and sometimes, that's the best kind of new beginning you can ask for.